I will call our City Council work session to order on April 27th, and again at 6:31 p.m. And we will start with a moment of silence and flag pledge. If you're able in a place, let's stand up, and we'll have a moment of silence and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tamara, roll call, please.
Anderson.
Here.
Hellier. Hellier.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Lee. Volk.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here.
Thank you very much. Just a few housekeeping matters. Again, please, as our last meeting, please refrain from using the chat room. And if you do have something to say, you can just go ahead and raise your hand on the screen. And Mr. Miller and I will try to pay attention and make sure that we get everybody in for your comments. If you're not speaking, please have yourself on mute so that we can avoid having any sort of feedback. And then as far as our agenda tonight, it is a long agenda with many items. And so I'm thinking that probably after agenda item number 5, we'll take about a 5-minute break. So that should be somewhere in the range of 7:30 to 8 o'clock, something like that, based on what staff has put together as a timetable. So again, a break after item number 5. So we'll start off our agenda with citizen comments. This is an opportunity to hear from our residents, business owners, and others. If you have a question or comment to the City Council, for the City Council, or a comment to staff, we allow up to 3 minutes. And if you do have a comment, when I finish speaking, please acknowledge that you're there and start your comment by stating your name and your address for the record. Is there anyone on the call, on the video meeting, that has a citizen comment this evening? And I would just follow by saying, if you have a public comment for any of the items, items 3 through 9, I will ask for public comment when we get to those items, as I have in the past at regular meetings. Is there any citizen comments this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 3, which is a substantial item as we look at responding to our comprehensive plan and getting things in place to implement that. And we have Daryl Morey here this evening, as well as our consultant, Dan Licht. Mr. Miller, is there anything you'd like to say at the start of this, or do we go directly to Mr. Morey? Okay. Mr. Morey, please.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I will give a real brief introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Licht, who's going to provide a more substantial presentation. As you remember, back in October, the City Council approved our 2040 comprehensive plan, and now we are tasked with updating our zoning ordinance and zoning map to be consistent with the 2040 comprehensive plan. So what we did following the approval of the comp plan was we had work sessions with the Planning Commission and City Council in November. It was primarily to discuss the uses and some of the proposed performance standards related to the new corridor mixed use land use category. And then what we did following that input from the Planning Commission, City Council, Mr. Licht, and Planning Department staff went ahead and drafted draft ordinance language to enact those new zoning districts, and also to bring other components of the zoning ordinance into consistency with the 2040 plan. That information was presented to the Planning Commission in work sessions in February on the 6th and 20th, and we received their input and incorporated that into the draft ordinance. I think Mr. Lick's memo from April 9th provides a real good overview of what's in the rather extensive red line ordinance that's attached to that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lick to go into a little bit more detail.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. It's a pleasure to join you tonight. We tried to provide you a little light reading for your stay at home, about 100 pages worth. Knowing your agenda is really full tonight, I just wanted to focus on the CMU related portions of the ordinance amendment. We have 3 zoning districts included in the draft language that are intended to implement the land use policies as part of the 2040 comprehensive plan. I'll just go through those quickly, and if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt. The M1 district, again, this would be applied to the I-35 corridor. It's basically taking the existing C3 commercial district and allowing for multiple family dwellings in that area. So this would apply similar to what has been developed at County Road 46 and I-35 under a PUD district, or what has been discussed adjacent to Fleet Farm on the east side of I-35, or even potentially the project that's coming forward at Timbercrest at Lakeville to allow for multiple family buildings. Those would be allowed by conditional use permit, again, so the council and planning commission have additional opportunity to review the appropriateness of the land use within that specific area for compatibility, but also to make sure that there's adequate infrastructure, including transportation and utility capacity for that use. The density would be set up at 26 units an acre, which is similar to what has occurred in Avon Lee and Spirit of Branston Farm. There are provisions recognizing that some of these areas would be adjacent to residential uses requiring a minimum of 30% open space within the lot. There's also a provision providing for a 50-foot landscape buffer yard separating a multiple family use from any adjacent single family zoning district. Otherwise, the basic development standards would be similar to C3 district uses. In terms of building height, the multiple family dwellings are limited to 4 stories. There is allowance within this district that the commercial uses could go up to 6 stories. That's currently provided for in the C3 district by conditional use permit. This is something that the EDC has advocated for having as a general allowance within the I-35 corridor, and recognizing where these locations exist within that corridor.
Yeah, quick question for you just on that. How do we categorize if it's, let's say it's commercial and residential mix? Let's say you have, like retail on the first floor, and then could you have 5 levels of residential? Like how would we define that differently, or would we define that differently?
Good question. It is written to limit a mixed use building to 4 stories. So any structure that includes the residential component is limited to 4 stories. We have parking requirements that follow the standards of the RH district, 2.5 stalls per dwelling unit, unless the size of the units is such that the number of bedrooms are less than 2 per unit. That allows for a reduction in the parking stalls. But within this district, we also have the requirement that they would have to provide 1 enclosed structure attached to the principal building. So that would typically be in an underground formation, but we've seen other places where they've done parking ramps adjacent to the structures as well to accommodate for that. Any questions about the RM1?
Again, on the parking, does the CUP process on this allow us to, maybe change that number to a 1.5, or based on what we see in market changes, or if it's closer to the bus line? Is there any flexibility on that?
Yes, there already are provisions in the zoning ordinance that would allow for a conditional use permit to reduce that further. In fact, we're looking at the Timbercrest project, 1.3 bedrooms per dwelling unit, so they would have a much lower parking requirement. So we're working to accommodate a situation like that. So then, if there are no other questions, move on to the M2.
I think, Mr. Lick, I think it might be helpful if you would get the information out, and then we can come back with questions. There may be other questions that kind of cover a variety of different areas, if that's okay. That's
fine by me. M2 district, this is specific to the Cedar corridor and really focused on that intersection at 195th and Cedar Avenue in the future. So this is really a blended Commercial multiple family district, the lot standards are much different in that we don't specify minimum lot area or lot width requirements. The commercial uses basically need to fit their structure and their parking on the site, whereas the residential uses are limited to that 26 units per acre requirement with minimum setbacks. There would be a 30-foot setback from Cedar Avenue or major roadways like 195th, 185th Street, etc., but otherwise 10-foot setbacks to try and encourage maximum utilization of the sites. 4-story building height for all uses within this zoning district, recognizing that Cedar is distinct from the I-35 corridor and transitions much more quickly into the lower density neighborhoods within Lakeville itself. Otherwise, the parking provisions and other development standards would be very similar to this. We did look at, as part of this district, removing auto-oriented uses that exist within the C3 district. But with some input from developers, we have included drive-through facilities as a conditional use within this zoning district to provide flexibility. So if there's a coffee shop, convenience restaurant, et cetera, they still would have that opportunity for that drive-through to facilitate traffic coming onto and off of Cedar Avenue. And then the final zoning district implementing the CMU is a medium density zoning district allowing for row or back-to-back townhouses at a slightly higher density than the current RM zoning districts. So rather than 5,000 square feet per dwelling unit, these would be allowed at 3,800 square feet per dwelling unit. That reaches the top limit of the 9 units per acre established by the comprehensive plan for medium density residential uses. The development standards would actually be a little higher in terms of exterior finish requirements, matching that within the RH district, so 50% masonry materials. The setbacks would be the same as applied to the M2 zoning district, so we wouldn't require a buffer yard along major roadways, trying again maximizing the development opportunity within these sites and recognizing more urbanized character. So this would be much more similar to the land use pattern that developed at Springs at Lakeville, for example, at Cedar and Dodd. We've also provided some flexibility on the parking requirements within the dwelling units to allow some additional flexibility for access to those as well. There are some scattered sites where this would apply adjacent to commercial uses outside of the Cedar corridor, but with the zoning map update, the city would have the ability to control when and where that applies, and then looking at specific case by case, especially outside of that Cedar Avenue corridor. Just a couple of the other items that I'd highlight as part of the zoning ordinance update. We did look at all of the residential uses allowed in low to medium all the way through high density residential development. Currently, the zoning ordinance allows for single family detached homes on traditional yarded lots within the RST2 and RM1 district. Given the lower range of density guided by the comprehensive plan for the RM1 district, city staff recommends, and the Planning Commission agrees, towards removing single family dwellings from the RM1 district. That district still would allow for detached townhomes as a single family dwelling, but in a much more compact form. We'd also remove twin homes from the RH2 district. The balance of the ordinance amendments that you have included in the packet are from a comprehensive review. Basically, planning department staff and myself went page by page through the entire zoning ordinance to do probably the most comprehensive look through the document since the 2000 update, when it was entirely rewritten. So knowing that there's a lot of material, I'd like to have enough time for any questions council members may have.
Well, thank you for your comprehensive work on this as well as with staff. And it is time for questions, council. Who would like to begin? Questions or comments? Otherwise, I have a series of questions. Councilmember Lee.
I have a few questions. My first question is more about the feeling or the experience difference between the M1 and the M2 district. If you could boil down these ordinances to and how a resident is going to experience those two areas, what are the differences that we're going to see visually?
So both zoning districts allow basically the same range of uses. I think part of the distinction will be in the scope and the scale of each zoning district. The M1 district, where it's going to be located on I-35, will be much more single project located at very specific locations along that corridor. Whereas on the Cedar corridor, where the M2 district will be designated, you basically have 160 acres of land surrounding the future intersection at Cedar and 195th Street that will develop under those standards, then with RM3 zoning transitioning out from that. So it'll become much more cohesive, probably land pattern, similar to what we saw in Maple Grove.
Gotcha. So piggybacking off of that, the types of dwellings that can take place in M1 and M2, why the difference in the parking off-street parking requirements, 2.5 versus 2.0?
So they are the same requirement in both zoning districts. That the base requirement starts at 2.5, but if it's a more urbanized or smaller scale building based on those number of bedrooms per dwelling unit, then we will drop the requirement down to the 2.0. And again, with the interest of trying to minimize investment in parking and hard surfaces, the city's definitely demonstrating willingness to reduce that further where it's shown to be warranted.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, council, other questions? I have a few, but is there anyone else that has a question at this point? Hellier.
Thanks. Well, how do we come up with a 30% efficiency rate going from 10 to 30? Is that a market trend? Is that, how do we decide on that?
That standard was looking at some of the projects that have been brought forward. For example, the development at County Road 46 and 35. They were around that 30% requirement. I believe also the project at Avon Lee was as well. The project that we're looking at in Timbercrest is at 30% with efficiency and 1-bedroom units that are slightly under the minimum floor area requirement the city has in place today. So we're reflecting what the market is showing us as the necessary number. And the Planning Commission did indicate that they would be willing to review that further in the future.
Okay.
Mayor, I think you're muted.
Thank you very much. Any other questions at this time? Otherwise, I have a few. The first is around the six stories versus the 4 stories. And on page 74 in section 116515, it says that the M1 district has 6 stories, and it does not include a statement about the 4-story restriction on housing, on residential. I guess I'm kind of curious where that shows up.
Thank you, Mayor. That provision is within the specific standards that apply to multiple family dwellings. So it's on page 64 under item N, bullet number 2.
Okay, and that's not going to create confusion to have the other section say that anything can be up to 6 stories?
So the way the conditional uses are set up is it's allowed within this zoning district subject to these standards that are outlined then under that. So all of the standards that apply to allowing residential uses within that zoning district are listed under the specific reference to that use.
Okay, so that all works fine, is what
Yes.
you're telling me.
Correct.
Okay. In terms of you mentioned about the removal of the single family from RM1, and also I think we removed on that little chart on page 6, that we removed like twin homes or something from, let me get there.
From RH1.
We removed twin homes from RH1 and RH2. So how does this work if, let's say I own land and it's currently RM1 zoned, and I want to put up and we've had a few of these recently they've had single family homes, detached townhomes, and twin homes. And now maybe they were RST2, I don't know. But if we have something and we're taking single family out of it, what happens to the developer? They need to come in and request a change from a zoning standpoint, or how does that work? Are we going to harm anybody by doing this, I guess is my question.
If it's an existing approved development, when we update the zoning map to include these no zoning districts, we'll reclassify those projects to match the most appropriate zoning district, likely to RST2 or to RS4. If it's a new project going forward, then the developer would have to request, along with their preliminary plat, a zoning map amendment and likely a comprehensive plan amendment.
So do we anticipate that there's going to be a substantial number of those with these changes or not?
No, not at this time. Based on the changes we made going through the land use plan, we tried to separate out where we anticipated single family coming in and limit more the locations for medium density uses to avoid kind of the crossover between single family and townhouses, and then to try and make it consistent with the densities listed by the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
Mayor, if I could take that a step further, we did see quite a bit in, I would say, the last 7-8 years, property that was zoned for RM1, utilizing either the small lot, basically utilizing the small lot single family. And as Mr. Lick mentioned, that does impact our potential density requirements that we have to achieve across the entire city. So we thought that there was plenty of opportunities for the smaller lot single family, in other zoning districts, and then the twin homes in other zoning districts. So this would be more consistent with the 2040 land use plan and the development pattern that we're proposing with the comp plan update.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification. I have 4 other just really quick questions, and they're not related to the CMU district. They're on some of the other items. The first is related to fences. And I recognize the change here. It changes kind of what someone has to do to get their fence approved. I just want to make sure that these these changes do not impact the other provisions around fencing. Like if you happen to be on Lakeshore, there's some rules around you can't go closer than 75 feet with a 6-foot high privacy fence, for example. So all that stuff stays in place, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. The second is, as far as downtown, I appreciate that the drive-through is acceptable conditional use in the whichever district it is on Cedar Avenue. These changes take drive-through away from downtown, and I'm wondering why we would not choose to have that be an acceptable conditional use, just like we are with Cedar Avenue.
So the change to allow the drive-throughs as a conditional use was a change made late in the process. I think that's something we certainly can revisit and make provision for keeping that as a conditional use within downtown to provide additional flexibility.
I would like us to do that. I don't know of anybody or any situation where we might want this, but as I think about urban environments and kind of how things are going these days, it might be advantageous for a coffee shop or something to have a small drive-through. So I'd like us to look at that. As far as the refuse containers, I appreciate what's envisioned here, and I asked some questions this afternoon. If you go down 199th Street from my house, there is no driveway to a garage for a lake home that's longer than maybe 25 feet. And I recognize that that's not compliant in terms of our current ordinance, but it is what we have. And so to restrict somebody to have a temporary dumpster and have it be 20 feet back from the curb is not going to work. So how do we handle those kind of situations?
Mayor, I think what we can do is take a look at that 20-foot setback. The goal there was to try and keep it keep the container out of the right of way and then provide some space for visibility. I think if we review situations such as the scenario you're outlining and look and see what that minimum setback is, to at least move it off the right of way, then we can adjust that standard.
And I think looking at that's a good idea. I appreciate that. I have no idea what the right of way is there because a lot of our streets around the lake are not in the place where they're supposed to be. And
Yeah.
so I think we have to have something here that's workable. And I appreciate that. I appreciate what we're trying to accomplish. I just don't see that it's workable in some of the unique situations we have. So I do think we should look at it further to clarify.
Mhm.
And then lastly, I just had a question on the condo association. And there's a provision in the detail somewhere that said that the city council can get the planning commission involved if we want to. That's my
Yes.
words, not how it was written. I'm trying to figure out what would a situation be. I mean, what are we trying to accomplish with that provision? What would be a situation where we would turn it over to the planning commission? I haven't been able to, I don't understand how to think that through.
Yeah, I think the situation, so when we wrote these provisions, it basically follows the same process as a final plat, which the way the process works for that is it comes to the council without planning commission review. But if there's a question pertaining to compliance with the provisions of the subdivision ordinance, zoning ordinance, or conditions of approval from the preliminary plat, can be referred to the planning commission for additional review. It's unlikely that happens as part of final plat reviews just because they are intended to be dotting the i's and crossing the t's. But we just kept the same provision in there in case there was a need for additional kind of a second look from a land use perspective at a request. I'm sorry, Mayor, I think you got muted.
Yeah, thank you. Council, any further questions? Hellier.
Okay, a couple. When you talk about the containers, the trash containers, are you talking about bagsters or like the actual metal or all? How do we define that?
So they're temporary refuse containers, whether it was be a bagster, the fabric, or if it's a metal, they'd be subject to the same provision. It's that you can have a permit to have one on your driveway while there's a project going on or you're cleaning out your house.
Right. So if you're in the middle of renovation for 60 or 90 days, you can have it there as long as it's part of the building permit.
Correct.
Okay. Other question, can I have some clarity around the auto repair downtown? Does that have any impact on the businesses that are currently there? Or how do you define major? Like, is the Goodyear a major auto repair or is that minor? How does that differ?
Goodyear is a minor auto repair, so tire replacement, oil change, tune-up type businesses. Those are minor auto repair. Major auto repair is your auto body, typically has a paint booth, more structural type work.
I have a little bit of concern because I just don't know what, in the future, if a Goodyear type or one of those wanted to do dent repair, let's think about that a little bit harder and discuss what other options there are, or if we can allow use in the future. I'm just, if there's a small shop towards the end there, if they want to do paintless dent repair or paint dent, I don't know. I guess I just have concerns about that. And then the other one on electric vehicles, are those recommendations or are those mandates? I guess I didn't look into the direct language. I only looked at the memo here.
Yeah, so at this point, what's outlined in the ordinance says you're going to provide electrical vehicle charging stations in your parking lot. This is how they need to be set up dimensionally. There isn't a requirement in there for a minimum number of charging stations or any provision for them. It's basically a placeholder for if it comes down from the state at some point in the future, you could add that requirement, but the expectation is that the market is going to drive this as much as anything.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Lee, did you have a question?
Question about residential parking. I'm trying to understand if the change there is becoming more restrictive or less restrictive based on what, because I just don't understand the language very well.
So the issue with this, it's always been problematic from an enforcement standpoint because ordinances have traditionally said, well, you can't have a business vehicle parked at your residence. The city attorney has concerns when you start looking at the vehicle and what it says on the side of it to determine that it's a business vehicle. You also have the problem now that full 1-ton size trucks with dual rear axles are used as personal vehicles as much as most any other vehicle. So trying to switch between all these types of vehicles is difficult. So from a regulatory standpoint, what we're saying is we're going to base the requirement for the limitation based on weight and the federal highway classification. So if it does have dual rear axles, or if it's a box truck with dual rear tires, then it's above that weight classification and the federal highway classification and shouldn't be parked there. This will allow for people with a work van or work pickup to be able to park it on their property.
I guess I'm trying to think. Oh, sorry, go
ahead. Where do vehicles, I suppose this is a commercial vehicle, but a front end loader parked in a driveway then is above, well, I don't know if that's actually above the weight classification, but it is a construction vehicle.
So from that standpoint, then you can look at, now you're storing a trailer with commercial equipment on it on a residential property. So that would still be enforceable.
Gotcha.
I just have a little bit of concern about that too, in that there's a lot of people that have Sprinter vans, and I guess I don't know if a Sprinter van has dual in the back. I don't know. I have concerns about that, or how restrictive we're really going to be on that. Has it been a problem that has come up that we had to deal with, or what's the impetus on that?
Daryl?
Councilmember Hellier, first of all, I'm not sure what a Sprinter van is versus a regular van.
It's like a Dodge Sprinter. It's like one of the tall work vans. They have typically metal sides.
It's actually a Mercedes van that has a specific Sprinter name.
Yeah.
And Dodge has a Pro Master or something, but it's kind of like Kleenex. People call them Sprinter vans because they're all a particular type, and they do sometimes have dual rear axles. And some people might use them for a Class B RV. It's a very adaptable vehicle, particularly with a high top for a Class B RV. So we certainly don't. I mean, I hadn't really thought about this. I do think this is probably an area we need to look a little more into in terms of what are we going to be actually restricting.
Well,
there is a provision.
I was just going to say
exempting recreational vehicles. So as long as they're licensed as a recreational vehicle, then they're subject to different provisions.
And I just wanted to add, Mayor, that again, as Mr. Lick outlined, it gives a little bit, intended to make it a little bit easier for code enforcement in dealing with call-in complaints. If if there is a resident who works for a company and he drives home his regular size van, just because it says a company name on the side of it, it's basically the same size as any other household van that could be in that driveway. And should we be taking action in those cases? The other thing too that we're dealing with a little bit, and I hate to pin this on one specific incident, but I'm sure we all recall the food truck explosion that we had in the city a few years ago. And we do still get calls and complaints on that as well. And this ordinance revision would give us a little bit of more clarity in dealing with situations like that as well.
Yeah, Mayor, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I need to look into it more. I'm not comfortable in this. For example, I have a neighbor who he does repair work and has a work van, and it's one of these Sprinter vans. I'd have to walk outside and see if he's got dual, but it's, it just happens to park in his own driveway, and I don't think it's ever been a nuisance. I'm worried that we've got a bunch of folks in town like that might get drug into one of those type of scenarios, and maybe we need, I don't know. I'm concerned about that.
Sounds like an
Mayor,
area we need to look a little bit at.
Yeah, Mayor, we can look further at both the classification by federal highway and then the weight standards and see if there isn't a way to split the needle on this.
I mean,
That
I'm
would be great.
okay with talking about, if we're really concerned about food trucks, to say that commercial vending food trucks shouldn't be parked in residential area versus, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but we should look. We got to look into it more, I think.
Okay. I think staff has the message. Is there any further questions, council? Michelle?
So I want to go back to Luke's question about downtown. So if that business downtown that does auto mechanic is an auto mechanic business, they're on, I'm going to call it Main Street, Holyoke, whatever. If they wanted to sell, would they be able to sell their building to somebody else that's doing a business? And if they have hoists, do the hoists count against them?
Mayor, so the existing business downtown are all minor auto repair that would continue to be allowed. If there was a business downtown that was major auto repair today and the city repealed the provision allowing for it, it becomes non-conforming. It can continue as it is. It's basically grandfathered in to continue until that use changes or otherwise ceases.
Can I ask you, how does the minor turn into a major when it's a mechanical shop? Not a body shop, but a mechanical. How does it go from minor to major?
So it's in the definitions section of the ordinance, kind of outlining the specific uses. And I think the primary distinction is doing auto body repair, and then the paint booth is the triggers.
Okay, so I saw those, and to me, those are two separate types of businesses. So in my world anyway, coming that my husband's owned a body shop before, so they're two separate business. You never have oil mixed with paint. So that's why I was trying to figure out, making sure that we weren't going to somehow or another constrict having a mechanic shop downtown. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Volk. Any other questions, council? Seeing none, I will go to the public. And is there any citizen comment around this particular agenda item? And again, we follow the same rules as we do for citizen comments, up to 3 minutes. And if you have a comment, please state your name and address at the start of your comment for the record. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this matter? Hearing no one, I think staff, you have good input on these matters. And any final comments, council, on this? And then what is the timetable and next steps?
Mayor, Daryl and I discussed that today, knowing that you typically ask what the next steps are going to be. So we want to be prepared to go back to the Planning Commission on May 21st for the public hearing, and then move this forward to council so that we can have this in place. We have groups that are interested in having these provisions ready for their use. So.
Okay, that sounds great. And if you would make sure that the Planning Commission is aware of the questions that came up this evening, so they have that information, that would be great as we follow up on those. I think we've taken care of this item, and we'll move on to our next item, which is fireworks. And Mr. Miller, I didn't look. Is Mr. Hennon on the call?
He is.
Yes, I
believe.
am.
Yep, he is here. So
Okay. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Mayor. As the city council is aware, the city celebrates the 4th of July with a firework display, which is part of the annual Panaprog celebration each year. And for the past 25 years or more, the display, along with family entertainment and including music and food trucks, has been held at the Lakeville North High School. Although Panaprog is not currently planned to be celebrated in the summer, with discussions to have a celebration in the fall because of COVID-19, staff is considering having a firework display on the 4th without the entertainment and food trucks. If this were to happen, staff is recommending having the launch site for the fireworks at King Park, which is centrally located in our community and is at a kind of a higher elevation in the city as well. Over the past few years, the cost for the display has been around $30,000. Funding for the display typically comes from donations, the Panaprog Board, and Lakeville Liquors. To date, we have about $23,700 has been committed for this year's display, and Lakeville Liquors has budgeted $13,000, and J.J. Taylor, which is the largest donator each and every year, $10,000. We always thank them. Very gracious donation, and another $700 from Knights of Columbus and Minnesota Energy Resources. Over the past few years, and again this year, previous donators have decided to provide their dollars to other projects, or they have decided that they didn't have the funds this year to donate to our display. So tonight, staff is seeking direction from the council regarding having a firework display on the 4th from King Park. And if the direction is to move forward, the communications department would take the steps to remind residents of social distancing practices and encourage residents to enjoy the display with their families from their homes. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hennon. Council, comments, thoughts? Hellier.
I think it's extremely important to make this happen. So whether it's, we put another jar at Lakeville Liquors, or we find some money in the city budget, or I don't know, I think it's just really important to still have the fireworks. So whatever we can do, or, whether it's an online contribution from individuals, whatever it is, I think we need to make this happen. And I think King Park makes sense. So.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Volk?
So I think King Park makes sense, and I'm probably going to be the only one that's Scrooge. I really don't think that we should have 4th of July fireworks this year. With the canceling at Panaprog, it's not going to surprise anybody. I think we are going to have a lot of people upset with us that we do have them, and I don't even know how you're going to enforce the 6-foot practice, or even if it turns out to be that it needs to be 13 feet. I just don't, I get it, Luke, that, that we need to have something patriotic to celebrate since all the things that we've been going through. But at this point, like I say, I'm just going to kind of be Scrooge here. I really don't think it's in the best interest at this point, and there's probably going to be more people happy that we do not have it this year. So that's my only comments. Thank you.
Councilmember Wheeler, Lee, do you have any comment? Otherwise, I do have a comment. Wheeler.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
No, I think we should. I don't think we need to raise more funds. Whatever funds that we have, King Park seems like a great spot. We can put on a good 10-minute show just to get people out on their decks. But, I don't think we need to go with the big bang, So whatever money we raise, I don't think we need to go scraping pockets to invest more into it.
Okay. Councilmember Lee.
I agree that we should have the fireworks as well. I think King Park is a good location. Maybe there are other places as well on a high grade that maybe have smaller space for people to gather. Because I guess from the background in the packet, it made it sound like from this location, almost anyone could see those fireworks from home. Is that true? Do we know that for a fact that most people would be able to see that from a local park anywhere in the city? As
Well, I think
opposed to a
that's
large gathering?
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the ideal spots, because it's centrally located. And like I mentioned, it's a higher elevation. Can everyone see it? I can't answer that, but I think, it's going to be one of the best that we can offer.
I mean,
Hellier?
I think, part of it is we don't know what it's going to look like in July, and maybe we will be able to have people sitting out, but certainly there's enough parking where people can sit in their cars, whether it's the fire station, whether it's Century, whether it's, I think there's plenty of location where you can safely be with your family to watch the fireworks. And if we can, figure out how to tune some music to those local FM, like the churches have been doing, to the parking lots, I think you'd have, a message from the city and music, whatever. I think you can make it appropriately socially distanced.
And Councilmember Lee.
I just want to follow up on what Luke said. As a kid in Anoka, they did a lot of those tune into your radio type fireworks, and that really encouraged people to stay in their car as sort of a drive-in event from anywhere in Anoka. So I think we can make the message clear that we're still trying to maintain that social distancing, but celebrate freedom and liberty and the positives as well.
Thank you very much. My own opinion on this is I think we need to have them. I think for just the reasons you said, Councilmember Lee, and I think the opportunities for us to, at least in a spirit standpoint, come together in spirit and celebrate our nation, I think is a good thing. I like the radio idea. I think that's awesome. I had not thought of that, and I also we don't just comment that we don't know where we're going to be in July in terms of this virus, so we may have opportunity to be together, we may not, but we're just going to have to see what happens. And this is flexible enough and allows us to come up with different options. And I think King Park's a great location. I'm not sure how well I'll be able to see them, but we'll figure that out. And I think it's a good idea to go forward. So
you'll be on a pontoon.
I don't know. Well, I've been trying to figure out the sight line from the pontoon, to be quite honest. So we'll have to see how that works out. So
I would add in if we could have the police chief kind of figure out what traffic would look like, and because again, at the same time, the police station and the fire station are there. So if we had an emergency or something, I want to make sure that we wouldn't have excess traffic. So I don't know how we have to think through one ways or whatever to make that happen.
Yeah, Mayor, frankly, I think we need to encourage people not to come to the area to watch them. I think we need to encourage people to find places away from the fireworks to watch. And I think that should be part of our messaging. So
is it possible, and I don't know the technology here, but is it possible to still do an FM radio station and encourage people to stay at home? I mean, can we pick up an FM station? I don't know how that works.
We'll have to look into that. There's going to be a cost with that too. And I don't know what we'd have to look into that.
Okay. Volk.
Okay, so thank you. So this Scrooge is comfortable if everybody stays in their cars, or if we encourage some way or another that we're going to encourage the social distancing as much as possible. So thank you for the discussion, and I appreciate you hearing my concerns. Thank you.
Okay, Hellier.
So, sorry to keep drawing this out. I guess one other thing would be our communication staff does a really good job with our YouTube channel, and maybe you put together some sort of message on the YouTube that they can play in their car through Bluetooth or whatever, instead of using the radio. But at least it's a way that we can all be together digitally and have similar experience.
Okay, so let me just take a minute and go to the public and see if we have any comments on this matter. Again, just like citizen comments, is there anyone joining us this evening that has a comment on this particular agenda item? Hearing none. Council, any further input for staff? Otherwise, I think it's pretty clear what we would like to proceed with. Any clarification needed by staff? Mr. Hennon?
Nope. Well, thank you. I think we got it.
Can I just ask you one more question? Do you know when Panaprog is going to make an official announcement that July is not happening?
Mayor,
I'm getting a lot of questions on this.
Mayor, I think they are meeting tonight or tomorrow, and they're going to make a final decision.
Okay.
I've seen draft press releases that they have ready to go. So.
Okay, thank you. Been a lot of questions coming up. Okay, we'll move on to our next item, Parks referendum update, and I guess we'll go right back to Mr. Hennon.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, the City Council is pretty familiar with this subject matter as it has been discussed over the past few years, not only by the City Council, but also by the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Committee. And the last time the City Council discussed the issue was at the March 30th City Council work session. And if you recall, at that time, several council members were hesitant to move forward with an August 11th park bond referendum election, considering the recent events. And staff was directed to bring the item back to the council at tonight's work session for further discussion. On April 15th, the Parks, Recreational, Natural Resources Committee discussed the referendum issue, and they did unanimously recommend postponing the election on August 11th and revisiting the subject matter in August and or September. And considering this is the same packet of material that staff provided the City Council on March 30th, I won't go through it in detail with you again. So at this time, staff is seeking direction from the council regarding if they'd like to move forward on the referendum on August 11th. And if so, the City Council would need to consider a resolution calling for a special election at a City Council meeting in May, followed by the City Clerk providing a written notice to the County Auditor and the Secretary of State no later than May 27th. If the council does decide to postpone the election, staff would like some direction regarding continuing to move forward with the purchase of the single-family property that abuts Antlers Park, which is part of the master plan for the park. And one final note, one of the project items on the list, if you recall, is an improvements to Ames Arena. And Finance Director Geraldine Erickson will provide a funding option for this project as part of the next agenda item on your agenda for tonight. So staff is here to answer any questions you might have.
So Mr. Hennon, so just to be clear, the one new piece of information we have here is that the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Committee has met and that their perspective at this point in time is to pause. Is that correct?
That's correct. And not move forward on an August 11th election, yes.
Okay, thank you. Council, comments, questions? Wheeler.
I think if we're going to do it, we just go with the general election on the in September.
November, you mean?
Or November, sorry. Yeah. That's my opinion. I mean, got time to figure out the money situation or what number we want to come in at, and that's where the most people are going to vote anyways.
So what would be the timing about November?
Well, November, the council would have to consider resolution in August, either August 3rd or the 17th, and then the city clerk would have to provide the written notice no later than August 22nd.
Thank you. Hellier.
So this is a little bit of a jump ahead. Let's say we push off till November, or at least we don't do August and we push off a decision and we decide not to have it at all this year. What are we obligated on the efficiency updates that we had that group, I can't remember their name, they came in to pitch us on all these different ideas. Are we able to put that off, or are we committed to doing that project no matter what if we don't do a referendum this year?
Mayor and Council, we're not committed. What we've committed to so far is simply the design for that project. However, the numbers they provided us are only good assuming we do a project starting no later than next year.
Can you just clarify which project you're talking about, Mr.
That'd be
Miller?
the Ames Arena, and mostly Ames Arena, but the arenas projects.
Okay. I mean, Volk.
I'm open to discussing whether we should do it in November. I'm not for sure that I'm ready to commit to November, even though that is the election that I would want it at as a person. It really depends on what transpires over the next couple of months. And when we all start getting back to work, et cetera, if we are. So I'm leaving that, up in the air. But I do have one question on the property that's adjacent to Antlers Park. It said $50,000 for demolition, and I was just kind of floored because I thought that was a lot of money. So if maybe you can explain how that estimate came in.
Yeah, that was a combination of the demolition, but probably also some attorney's fees to work on the purchase of that property. That might be a little higher than normal, but I know, talking with some other folks on our staff that just did some recently, that's probably not going to be too far off.
Part of that is asbestos removal, isn't it, Mr. Hennon?
Yep, you'd have to do an asbestos survey, and then if there's any asbestos or any other products in there that we'd have to remove, hazardous waste, that would be removed as well. So study and then removal.
Okay, that actually makes more sense because I've been quoted before on having a house demolished and it wasn't that high, but so it makes more sense if we're talking about asbestos, et cetera. So thank you.
Hellier.
Two things. I think one, I tend to side here with the Parks and Natural Resources Recreation Committee to postpone this discussion if we're going to go to November. And I think that makes sense. My other question on timing is, when are we obligated to do updates to Ames? I know that we've been stretching it. Is that, no matter what, has to be part of our capital budget this year, or is that something we can put off, or how does that work?
Well, we're not obligated to do anything, but there are issues with the mechanical that are continuing to not get better. And so it would be very difficult to keep pushing it for much longer.
Yeah, that part I understand, but I was just want to make sure there wasn't like one of these like Freon issues from the state where it's like you can't have it open at all, or one of those type of situations.
The type of Freon that we're using there, we can't buy anymore, or they're not making any more of. Mm-hmm. So there are places that still have stockpiles, and we can buy that from places, but they're not producing anymore, so the price is not getting any cheaper.
Okay.
So how far could we, can we feel comfortable we could limp along, or are we already there?
Well, it's a little bit of a, it's what your risk tolerance is.
Yeah.
There's a leak on Rink 1 at Ames that gets worse every year. And we make do and we fix it. But if it got to the point where it blew out totally, we would lose one of our rinks.
Rink 1. Yeah.
Rink 1.
Okay.
Which is where the high school north plays their games.
And we're probably obligated contractually to the Hockey Association for hours, right? So we would be in violation of that by not providing the hours, in theory.
Yeah, it would have some ripple effects. Absolutely.
So my feeling on the bond referendum is I appreciate the thinking of the Parks, Rec, and Natural Resources Committee, and I think pausing now and not doing August is the right thing to do. I, as well as the council member Volk, said it best. I'm not sure if November is going to make sense or not. based on the economic environment and kind of how the next few months go. So I think I think where I come down is we need to bring this back in July or whatever, and take a look at what the environment is, and do we do something in November or not. I don't want to. I'm very concerned. I've gotten, and we'll get to the COVID-19 update, but we've got a lot of businesses that are really starting to get really pinched, and I'm very concerned about adding more in. So I don't know if even this year makes sense at this point, but I think bringing it back to talk in July makes sense. As far as the house at Antlers Park, I think we should buy it. I think probably using park dedication funds at this point and having that transaction done, so we have control of what we need at such point in time. We're ready to go. Makes a lot of sense to me. We've got a deal negotiated. It's only going to get probably more expensive in the long run. So I think we should go ahead with that transaction, is my thought. Wheeler.
Or it could get cheaper.
Well,
I mean, if we're getting scared about the COVID stuff, things could get a lot cheaper here too. But I agree.
It's a unique situation, though. So
I agree. We should buy it, though.
Other thoughts, council, on the referendum? It sounds like we've got pretty strong consensus about pausing and having a conversation in July or August to see if November makes sense. And I think I'm hearing that it makes sense to go ahead and buy the property at Antlers Park. And we're going to talk more about Ames Arena when we talk about the bond issuance here next. So that's what I'm hearing. Any further comments on this one? Is there any public on the call in the meeting that would like to make comment on this matter? Hearing none. Staff, do you have what you need? Mr. Hennon?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for your work on this. Thanks so much. And let's take a 5-minute break. It is 7:34 p.m. on my phone, and so we'll be back at 7:39. Okay, well, we are back. We're still there's Councilmember Hellier, and we will call our meeting back to order and move into item number 6, bond issuance recommendations. And our finance director, Geraldine Erickson, is with us, so I will turn it over to you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. This item, we're going to be talking about 2 bond issuances, the 2020A and the potential 2020B. The 2020B is referring to the Ames Energy Savings Improvement Project, which you were just talking about with your last item. So we'll wait with that one for a bit. We'll start with the 2020A. And I do have Tammy Amdahl from Northland Securities on the line. She'll be providing some information about the bond issuance. But before we start with her PowerPoint, just like to give you a little bit of background on this particular bond issuance. It's for a number of projects, the 2020 Street Recon Project, the 170th and 179th Street projects, as well as the 210th Street project, the engineering portion of it. Includes the Ames Arena parking lot and various water projects. So it's a significant debt issuance for quite a few projects. I won't go into all of the other details yet, so maybe we can jump into the PowerPoint with Tammy. She, I believe, is going to share her screen, and so you can see each of the PowerPoint slides.
Sounds great.
Tammy,
welcome, Tammy. Tammy, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me, Mayor?
Yes, I can.
And I will turn on my video here. There we go. There I am. Good evening. Mayor, Council, can you see the presentation in front of you?
Nope.
I can load it up if we have issues. So.
Let me try one other thing. Okay, there, I think we're gonna.
There you go.
Okay. Now, I believe you probably can see the presentation.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, great. Mayor Council, Geraldine asked me to summarize what is included in the written finance plan in your agenda packet. So what I'm going to go through does not provide any new information. It's meant to summarize for the purpose of your discussion tonight. So as Geraldine mentioned, the estimated bond series at 15.6 million, and the three purposes. We look at it three purposes with respect to the authority to issuance. The street improvement portion is funded from tax levy and special assessments under Chapter 429. Just under 3.3 million for the water improvement project. And then the Ames Arena parking lot, which was referenced earlier, at 770,000. Bonds are structured, and you did review this somewhat, the structure at your last work session. So the bonds will mature each February 1st, and the term would be principal payable from 2021 through 2031, so 10-year term. You have included, and Geraldine has worked with you in your financial plans, anticipation of this tax levy. The tax levy will range from just under $1 million, 0.93 million estimated, to 1.06 million estimated. And there were two scenarios provided for the structure of the special assessments, which are impacting that range of tax levy. And if I understand, that's one of the discussion points you may have this evening with respect to the term for the assessments to be levied. The estimated interest rate based upon the city's rating on its existing outstanding bonds of AA1, and we have put 0.5 or 50 basis point spread into these estimated rates. So these are actually a little bit higher than what current rates are at. Just under 2.3, 2.27 average coupon, or true interest cost is what is used to evaluate the bids that will be received, which takes into account the purchasing price and the time value of money, 2.4 million. COVID-19, like everything else, is impacting the bond market. But one of the things I wanted to cover, and I don't know if you can see my mouse there, is that rates, while extremely volatile, and this is in the period of COVID-19, compared to the last 4 years, and this red line here is last year, 2019, rates remain at a historic level. The challenge has been, as far as execution, right after COVID-19 and the state started to put in place their shelter in place orders, that we really saw the volatility as far as liquidity. We are less concerned about that with respect to the timing of when Lakeville would be issuing your bonds. But we would note that in any given time, it is difficult to predict interest rates. And this time it is even more volatile. But important to keep in mind, as shown in this slide as well, from 2020 to today, rates are still at very historic level with respect to bond rates. There would be a 9-year call as proposed to be structured, and what that means is that on or after February 1st of 2029, the city could call in bonds and either refund for interest savings or to pay off bonds with cash. That is a consideration with respect to the special assessments, including potential prepaid, et cetera, that may allow you to call in some of those bonds before the final maturity date. We are recommending that the city seek a rating from Moody's, and that those rates that I went through earlier are reflective of the bonds being rated. I thought you might find it interesting to know, and this is recent data, that there are 17 Minnesota cities rated AA1 out of the 138 total Minnesota cities ratings by Moody's. So that's not all cities in Minnesota, that's the cities that Moody's rates. As far as process with respect to the 2020A bonds, for the parking lot improvements, as proposed, those would be issued under authority called tax abatement bonds. That requires some process in order for the city to have the authority to issue those bonds, including the approval of a tax abatement project. The city has done tax abatement before with respect to Post, but that was for economic development purposes. The process is similar, but in this case, it would be for a public improvement. There is a notice that would be published in a public hearing held. We would be working with staff to identify the taxable parcels that would be included in the project area. And if you had a chance to read through the finance plan, you may have noted while there are specific parcels where benefit is determined, those parcels do not receive specific notice, nor do their tax statements look any different as a result of the city identifying them with respect to including within a tax abatement project in order to finance a project like this. The bond sale dates proposed to be Monday, July 20th. The council would award that same evening. So bids would be received in that morning, and then the council would pass the resolution in the evening. I'm going to pause before I go through 2020A or 2020B bonds discussion. Mayor, if you want to take questions or if you want me to keep going, I would be glad to do so.
I think maybe we should talk about the A bonds first. And if there are questions, we could take those now and talk this through before we get to the B bonds. The B is Ames Arena, correct? Or the arenas?
The energy savings for the arenas, that is correct.
Yeah. So let's talk about the A. Council, any comments, questions on these matters? We've talked a little bit about some of this before. One of the questions I had, and I don't know if this is for you, Tammy, or for Geraldine, is we talked about the special assessment portion of this. And I think you've got an option in here for a longer period, 15 years versus 10 years. And I wondered about, I thought we had talked about not only the special assessment aside, but changing the underlying term of the bonds to 15 years as well. And I'm just curious if we did any modeling about that and what kind of savings that would provide kind of year over year, even though it'll cost us more in the end.
Well, I'll provide a response on that. Last month when we had looked at, and this is, the bond issuance was slightly higher when we presented it last month. But the difference in the scenarios that were presented showed that if we extended the street improvement portion from 10 years to 15 years, that it was just about $1 million more in interest. So roughly $200,000 more in interest for each of those 5 years to extend the street portion.
But how much would it help us on an annual basis for the first 10 years? I mean, because we would have some payment savings on the front end, right? Because it gets amortized over a longer period of time. Or isn't it that substantial?
I don't believe the levy was that much less. Let me just look here. Tammy, do you have that on the screen?
I can bring that up, so I will stop sharing my screen for a moment. So maybe, Mayor, if there's other questions while I'm bringing that up,
okay,
because I do have it.
Okay, that was really my only question on this A portion. Council, is there any other questions at this time? Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions.
Mayor, I have it, so I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Mayor, this will be due to size. This was in, what I'm showing is, was also in the last work session packet, so it is not new information, but it will provide the answer that you were asking about. So under that scenario, we had looked at two. We looked at extending the term of both the improvement portion and the water portion, and then just the street. So the tax levy for the first year, if it went to a 15-year term, would be just under 573,000 we had estimated.
So that does bring the tax levy down for 2021 from the 963,000 down to about 573. So roughly 390,000. Excuse me. Yes, 390,000.
So just to make, I'm sorry, Tammy cut out on me, so I didn't hear all of what she said, but what you just said, Geraldine, is that if we termed it out over 15 years, so we would do two things. One is extend the special assessment payments for the 15 years versus 10, which would be a policy exception. And then we would also make a policy exception for a 15-year actual term on the underlying note. And that would reduce our cash need on an annual basis by 360,000. Well, more than that, 390,000. 390, which is a substantial cash number, even though it costs us $1 million more in the end. That's what I hear you saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess the question, maybe it comes down to the financial update, but the question is, how tight will cash be as we look at our levy for this year? And if we can make an adjustment, a policy exception right now, which I think would be for good reason, to reduce that levy by 390,000, that needed levy by 390,000, that could be impactful.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, maybe we need to think more about that, but thank you for answering my question.
Mayor, question?
Yes.
So related to that, I mean, I do agree that is, 360 is pretty substantial. How would this allow us in 2 or 3 years to come back and refi in that shorter window to have the cash advantage, or we're locked in until that 29? So my concern is, are we thinking too short term about what next year is going to look like, and at the long run end up costing us more money?
Tammy, would you want to provide some information about the current law on advanced refundings and what the options are?
Yes, so under current law with the change in the federal tax bill in 2017, the city is not able to do an advance refunding. It would need to be a current. So what does that mean? That the bonds would need to be refunded within 90 days of their call date. And the bonds are proposed, I'm going to go back to this slide here, to be structured. So the first year that they would be callable is 2029. Now, the council could determine to structure these bonds with a shorter call, but it is going to cost you. Shaving a year off there, you may not notice that in interest rates. If we go shorter and under 8 years, investors, underwriters, and bidding on these bonds are going to require higher interest rates as a result of that. That still may be an option, but it is a cost in order to shorten the call, be lower than, let's say, year 2028.
So and when do we have to make a final decision? Is that today? Is it the next meeting? What's the window on that?
The window on that is not
today.
It is not today. It would be in not until June when you pass the resolution calling for the sale.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't help us. My point is I wanted to look at a more clear budget window at the end of the year to know what 21 looks like. You know what I'm saying? I want to see
I
the
do.
card, so to speak. So that
But-
just, you know.
But suffice it to say right now is that something in our toolkit as we move through the next month to get to the conversation we're going to have in June. If we begin to look at and say, okay, economically, we will know more 4, 5, 6 weeks from now than we know today in terms of how this is all going to play out. And so we have a tool in our toolkit to lower our cash requirement if we would choose to make an exception to our policy. So that's all we really need to know today, is that we have that option if we would want to exercise it. So it's helpful to understand that. Geraldine.
I'd be interested to see what the council's thoughts are on if you're looking at and concerned about 2021, which I think we all are. If instead of extending the debt out to 15 years, to be looking at how can we structure the bonds such that the financial impact on the levy for 2021 is somewhat closer to what we're striving for with a 15-year term, but it does put some pressure then on the remaining 9 years. Is that something the council would be open to keep that debt within a 10-year term versus extending it out and costing $1 million?
Wheeler.
I mean, you've heard me for years. I'm run the city like you run your house. Like, pay the bills you got as the best you can pay them and as fast as you can pay them. Stretching it out another 5 years and paying another $1 million makes zero sense to me.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Volk?
Geraldine, I just need clarification. So in this is what's in my brain of what I know. In the past, the school district has structured a repayment on a bond so that let's say you're paying less in the beginning and more on the end. And yes, sometimes it costs, a little bit extra money, but you're still paying it in those 10 years. You're just looking at the overall debt that you have going forward and trying to place it in years that would even it out sometimes, even though that's not what the cities looks like. But that's what the school district has done in the past. So is that what you're talking about? Stay within the 10, but maybe have a lower payment 1, 2, and then put more on the back the last 8 years.
It's kind of what I'm talking about, except that you might be thinking of when you're building a building for the school district that you're probably relying on future taxpayers to pay for that building because you've built it for expansion, versus this street is it's essentially, yes, there's going to be additional taxpayers in the future to contribute towards the payment of it, but the payments are pretty equal each year of the term. So we're not paying less now and then making larger payments going into the future.
Okay, so can you re-explain or restate your question then? Because I misinterpreted it in my brain. Restate your question about the
So what I'm stating is essentially, because I hear the council saying they're concerned about the cash for 2021. Should we target, so instead of 960,000 for a levy in 2021, the council is more comfortable with somewhere around 600,000, but that's based on a 15-year term. Maybe we strive for a $600,000 levy for this bond, but it does impact the other 9 years. So we keep the debt on a 10-year term, so we're not deviating from our policy. We're making a slight adjustment given the current economic situation, just a 1 year, and then we're not, it won't cost us $1 million. I don't have the exact cost of what it would be, but just
So,
find if you're open to that.
so if I could clarify now, so what you're suggesting is that we're not changing the structure of the bond term, but what we're doing is we're just, from a levy standpoint, we're underfunding what we would have to pay normally, and we're going to fund that through fund balance for 1 year and then pick it up over the next 9 years. Where's that money going to come from?
Actually, I wasn't talking about using fund balance for that first year. I was just structuring the debt such that the principal payment was a little bit lower in 2022 and higher in future years.
Okay, so it would actually be a lower structured payment on the debt in 2021 for 1 year.
Right.
And then we pick up more principal in the final 9 years, which I think is what Councilmember Michelle, Councilmember Volk is talking about, as far as just adjusting those payments. So you have a lower payment the first year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do have a question on what is the rate at 15 and what is the rate at 10?
Sherilyn, would you like me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead if you have it right in front of you.
Yeah, so bonds are structured with their serial bonds, so the coupon goes up. So here, I believe you can see the screen in front of you, and this is in your agenda packet and available on the website as well. So you can see that it's moving, and it depends what rates will be then, Councilmember, to answer your question, but approximately that 5 to 10 basis point increment on each year that you go up. So the longer that you push out the debt, those longer term maturities are going to have a higher interest rate.
Okay, Councilmember Lee had a question.
In the chart that Tammy had up before, wasn't scenario C an option where we would delay the first payment by a year?
That is correct.
And that was a 200,000 increase in the interest over the life of the bonds, but it allowed us for this fiscal year, correct, to not have to pay anything? Is that correct? And then it just basically the bond is an 11-year bond, but the year one is 0.
That we would have extended the first principal improvement portion by 1 year. So it went from 2022 to 2023, but it still was structured with a total of 10 payments, not 9. So it would have been 10 principal payments.
In terms of cash for this current year, that scenario could be an option with what we're talking about right now, correct?
Correct. It would delay the first year of levy by 1 year for these bonds, the 2020A.
So I think I'm hearing some appetite for from council members to be creative with the first year to see if we can take some pressure off the tax levy increase necessary. I don't know how much more detail we need around that right now in terms of from a timing standpoint, other than to continue to look at options, staff, around what we can do with that. Is there, you need to give me a cue here in terms of, do we need to talk more specifically and come to kind of more focus there, or can we continue just to work on options till we get to June? But I think there's I'm not hearing a lot of input around going out to the 15 years. And so stay with the 10 years, but be creative on the first year is what I'm hearing.
Okay.
Mayor, what about the assessment length? I haven't heard anybody comment about that, stretching it out to 15 versus the 10.
Council comments?
I would not support moving it out to 15 at this point.
It sounds more expensive than so I'd like to stick to the 10.
Okay, yeah. Councilmember Lee, you were breaking up a little bit, but I think I heard you say that you'd like to stick with the 10. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
I would prefer to stay with the 10 years as well. Councilmember Volk?
So I just want to be clear. The two have to coincide. So it's not like we can do something different for the people on the street versus what we decide to do as a council.
They can be different. And it creates a cash flow variance for the city to manage the cash flow variance. And Geraldine can speak more to that.
We do have multiple assessments. Some are, about half of them are at the 15-year term, and about half of the assessments are at a 10-year term, based on our current assessment policy. And so the models that you see here that Tammy has up, the assessment stream, the top one, you see some that are over 10 years and some are over 15 years, but the term of the bonds is still 10. And then the second scenario is that both assessments are at 15 years. So the council would be making a policy exception for the assessments that should be 10-year per the policy, but have been extended to the 15-year. And I guess just another thought to consider with, if you were to make any changes on those assessments, the 10 years and make them 15 years, really the only individuals that are being impacted are the 10-year assessments. We're not lengthening or would be considering lengthening the 15-year assessments, nor any of the past 5 to 10 years of assessments are being adjusted. So to be consistent with your policy and with property owners, you may want to consider keeping it per the policy, so you're treating them the same.
So my only, I don't want to go to 15 years either. My only concern last month was if there was a way to help them in the fact that the timing of when they had to have that final payment in before it went on their taxes. So if we could afford to delay their payment till March, April, or whatever, and we can't. So that, when I learned that, there's nothing I can do for them. So, I mean, I can't see making them pay more either in 15 years, because that's what they'll end up doing on it. And that's not fair. So I was just trying to figure out a way to help them out this first year. And that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Is there any further conversation around the A portion of this? Otherwise, I think we've got direction to staff to continue to stay at 10 years, to focus on a first year creative approach to see if we can manage our tax levy a little tighter. And that's where we're at. Okay, we'll go to the B portion. Geraldine, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to add that in the next month, we will also be looking at any prepayments that we've received on the other bond issues that impact the levy for 2021, and that will be, I'm sure we'll have a positive impact on it. So.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. So let's go to the B portion, the energy savings.
Mayor, Council, just a few slides on this, and this focuses on the ability of the City Council to approve the issuance of bonds. And there are 2 authority areas. And let me correct myself. The first one would be, and the city has done this in the past, is the EDA would issue the bonds as lease revenue, and the city would enter into a lease agreement and then sub-agreements for the financing of the improvements. The difference from that scenario from what the city has done in the past, because of current economic conditions, it is very likely that the city would need to, or the EDA, to structure those bonds with a debt service reserve. And what that simply means is the size of the bonds would need to include funding to cover 1 year's annual debt service. So it is a very costly type of financing. Nevertheless, it is an authority that is available to the city through the EDA. The other option, which many cities across the metro and across the state have been using for ice arenas, park facilities, community centers, is the use of general obligation tax abatement bonds, or it could be done as a loan if it was privately placed with a bank. It is issued by the city. It is the same authority that the city is considering with respect to the financing of the parking lot improvements at Ames Arena as part of the 2020A bonds. But it would be a larger abatement project that would be necessary to reach the $7 to $8 million of project costs that are needed. The process is the same that you've been through and will go through with respect to the parking lot improvements. There's identification of parcels. There is notice in the newspaper for a public hearing. You hold a public hearing, you pass a resolution, and then you have the authority to issue the bonds. The method of sale for either of these could be through a private placement where it would be placed locally with a bank. I believe at least that city staff was interested in that because of the draw provision. With bonds, municipal securities, you issue the bonds at the start of when you close on the bonds. There is no drawing on it as you need the funds. With that, and that was the only slide I had on that, but I want to turn to your agenda packet. And Geraldine, unless you wanted to cover the discussion on the scenarios that were included in the council packet. Geraldine, would you like for me to walk through these?
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you, Tammy.
Okay. So 3 scenarios that we talked about, 2 have the same authority, but one would be done as a private placement and competitive sale for the general obligation tax abatement bonds. Long story short, given the facts and the timing, that the use of general obligation tax abatement bonds through a competitive bond sale would result in the lowest average annual debt service payment and cost to the city, the school district, and to the Lakeville arenas. Even though under this scenario, the city would be able to, and we've structured this example that there was to be a draw in 2020, 21, and 2022. Even with that, because of the requirement of the debt service reserve and because of the higher interest rate, because there is no general obligation pledge on lease revenue, it still leads to the conclusion that a general obligation tax abatement bond competitively sold is estimated to result in the lowest cost to the city. So those are the scenarios that are outlined. Tonight, there is no need for a decision. It was to provide information to inform the council's ongoing discussion with respect to financing the ice arena energy savings improvements. Mayor, those are my comments, and I am ready for questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Council questions, thoughts
Mayor,
on this?
real quick, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Please.
So just as a reminder, this would only be necessary if we did not include this in a referendum, or if we did include it in the referendum and the referendum failed. So this would be funding this outside of a referendum. And it's also then would be split 50-50 with the with ISD 194. And so if you see on Tammy's slide there, that bottom right corner showing an average annual debt service payment of $540,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, Geraldine and Tammy, but that's the total. So the city's share of that would be half of that every year. We have had discussions with the school district superintendent about this, and so he is aware, and we've had discussions that this is something that's coming up. We would either, to do this, we would probably enter into a separate agreement, much like we have with the Haase Arena debt. so that it's spelled out in black and white exactly what those requirements are. The other option is that we enter into an agreement with Lakeville Arenas to where this actually becomes an expense on the Lakeville Arenas budget. And then that any shortfall in the arena's budget would then be covered 50-50 by the city and the school district. I think staff's preference would be to go into it just with a clean agreement with the school district before we issue the bonds, and so that we have everybody on the same page. But I just wanted to be clear that this is the scenario where this is funded outside of a referendum.
Thank you very much. Council comments, questions? Hellier.
Just to clarify, this is for the entire Ames project, not just like lighting upgrades and those type of things?
This is the entire Apex agreement. So that includes the majority of the project is at Ames, but there are some features of it that does some improvements at Hasse as well.
Okay, but so like boards and cooling and all that, that's part of this?
Yep,
okay.
That's it. And this is also, so if Geraldine would probably be able to clarify this, but if we gave Apex the green light, they would begin construction. They would like to begin construction in the fall to take advantage of fall construction so they don't have to do winter construction on some of the outside building. The cost of the project does go up somewhat, and they built this into the agreement if we have them start after November. Either way, they're going to start requiring or asking payments in 2021. And so we would have to cash flow that, but we could, I assume, then Geraldine or Tammy reimburse ourselves with those bond proceeds. So
Yeah.
As far as the agreement then, Mr. Miller, we've entered into the agreement, or can we adjust the timetable of the agreement so we wouldn't start till next year?
That is a contingency that's in the agreement.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Geraldine, I cut you off.
That's okay.
Okay. Council, any other questions or comments at this time? Otherwise, this will just continue over and we'll continue to discuss timing and how to structure this as we move on, I guess. Please,
I guess I would just like some clarification. So if we do not proceed with the referendum, is the council on board with going this route?
Hellier.
I think it's too early to make that determination. But I'm still open to figure out how do we make the Ames project work, even if we don't go to referendum. I just don't want to commit to something when we still are, looking at budget. To me, if we have to talk about trade-offs related to staffing in the city or doing the Ames project, I pick keeping staff. So that's where I'm at. Does that make sense?
And I guess my feeling on this is I think if we choose not to do the referendum, then we have a question about how much risk do we want to absorb with the timing of when we do this. So there's still a related timing question. If we didn't have a timing question, if for some reason, let's say there was a D-Day that said we had to do this legally, then I clearly would support moving forward with a bond deal and putting the JPA in place with the school district and move forward. But I don't hear us having a drop dead date, so I think we still have that timing question. If we don't do the referendum, if we do the referendum and it passes, then we're fine. But so I guess I don't know when our next milestone is in terms of when we have to make a decision with the contractor we've selected, or
Well, we should, I think, we're going to have to come back in July to talk about the park referendum. We don't need to make this decision before July. So
Okay.
we can revisit it then.
Okay. Is that comfortable, Council? Geraldine?
Just from the standpoint of the school district, if we were to move forward for them to incorporate any levy, any amount into their 2021 levy, they're going through that process over the summer months. And Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong, timing for making a decision about tax abatement, identifying parcels. I think we had looked at maybe a July 15th date.
That was dependent on the issuance in October. The process to approve the tax abatement could happen fairly quickly. It's a 10-day notice, and it's just really the staff time to identify the parcels.
Okay. So probably the larger issue being if we move forward with this and we need to have funding by the city and the school district, that it is also dependent on their schedule to levy for this.
Right, and they're under the same time schedule we are, aren't they?
Yep.
Roughly?
They adopt a preliminary levy in September. Yep.
Yeah. So July
Okay.
should be good. Okay. Okay. I should ask if there is any public comment on this. Is there anyone in the meeting that would like to make public comment regarding this matter? Please speak up at this point. Hearing no one. Is there any further discussion, Council? And any further questions, staff, or are we in good shape? We're good? Thank you very much. Thank you, Tammy, for joining us.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to year-end 2019 and first quarter 2020 financial update. Ms. Erickson,
All right.
You're back.
I'm back.
You're
Okay.
back.
So 2 reports here, the preliminary 2019, and I will mention that staff is going through the annual audit right now, and so these numbers are not final, but they should be pretty close to being final as we are wrapping up all of the sections for the auditors to review. And let me just get to the top of my page here. 2019 looks very good compared to our estimates even. We came in about 1.3 higher than the estimates. So revenues were about $1 million more than the November budget estimates. And primarily that's going to be in the area of the permits. And you can see in the chart in the memo that our actuals were based on an estimate of 475. Our budget was 350 for the year, and the permits came in at 521 for single family. Same with townhomes. They came in at 99 versus the 75 that we were estimating. There was kind of a run on the permits in the last month or so of the year. So that added significant revenues to the general fund. And then in other areas, there are some areas that we actually came in a little bit less. For example, court fines fell short of the estimates by about 18,000. Personnel or expenditures came in about 221,000 under the November budget estimates. We like to make those comparisons with budget as well as the estimate to see how close we are coming to those estimates, to make sure that they're reasonable when we present them to the council in November. So expenditures were about 0.8% under the budget estimates, 200,000. And so bottom line, that leaves the general fund at an estimated fund balance ratio of about 53%. We had estimated that it was going to be, I think that's right. It was going to be about 48.9%, but it is coming in higher because it's $1.3 million higher. And so on page 6 of the agenda packet, it gives some information about the fund balance, what comprises the fund balance and the ratio that we're using. And the council did commit $100,000 to partially fund projected compensated leave liability. They also have an assigned fund balance for 2020. We were using about $750,000. And so the portion that's unrestricted, you net out forfeitures and police donations and what is assigned to prepaids and inventory. That piece is what is called unspendable, the prepaids and inventory. It also includes the internal funding that we provided for the post Mom Brands project, and that's about roughly 400 some thousand. And so those funds are not available for the council to repurpose for anything else. They're unspendable. And so that comes in at about 16.4 million. And it's about roughly 53% fund balance ratio for year end 2019. And so
Carolyn,
the council will then, yes.
I'm sorry. I have two questions on this. The first is, have we done this adjustment in the past for prepaids and inventory? And the second is, because I don't remember, so thank you for nodding your head yes. And the second is the post funding is, can you remind me what that was for?
It was the state had provided some funding, economic development, and then
okay.
the city had.
That's right.
Contribution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And that funding we're charging interest to that tax or that fund. And then in, I believe, 2023, the council will establish a tax abatement district to recoup those funds, general fund.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. So any questions on the preliminary year-end general fund report?
Council, any questions? I don't have any. It's a great report and very clear and descriptive. Thank you very much, and your whole team.
Thank you. You know, it puts us in a great position as we start the 2021 budget process, that the council will have some options. Of course, working within using fund balance reserves for one-time purchases or long-term purchases. We've done that with the last few budget processes to consider using fund balance reserves to assist with those kinds of purchases. So the first quarter report, there's typically not a whole lot to present in the first quarter because there's not as much activity as what we will see during the summer and the fall with construction and park programs and so forth. I did put some comments in here about, you know, that we will realize some impacts from the COVID-19 under property tax revenues. Dakota County is considering some alternative distribution dates. So whereas we typically have received our installments in June and July, those might be adjusted. So we'll be looking at our cash flow to see where we need to make some adjustments. Permits, we are exceeding actually last year at this point. And I also gave reference to where we are as of April 22nd, that we're at 169 single family permits. Other than that, it's pretty standard. We're at this point in the process for general fund. We do anticipate, and Administrator Miller will be talking about this later, probably with the impacts of COVID-19, that we do anticipate some revenue losses and some adjustments in expenses and how we're going to address some of those. I won't go into that right now, but any questions on the general fund for first quarter?
Hellier.
Do you have any sense that maybe this is not the right time to ask? I mean, if let's say there's no baseball, youth baseball, softball, any type of youth athletics this summer, what's the impact to the revenue of the city on, you know, park rental, that type of stuff?
I believe we had provided numbers just recently to the League of Minnesota Cities, and the revenue losses for parks, I think was about I think it was about 132,000, but then you have to subtract out the direct expenses, and it was more in the 50,000 range.
Okay.
I can confirm that though.
Yeah, I did see something related to that, but I was just wondering, was that just through the first quarter, or that was anticipated for the whole year?
For the whole year, or what we anticipate at this point.
Okay.
Any other questions on the first quarter report? I think it's fascinating that we're at 169 single-family permits at April 22nd. And I think another big question as we get to later to the COVID-19 topic and what's going to unfold here is what might we anticipate from a housing standpoint when things might be negatively impacted and what that might look like and what sort of revenue impact might that have on us, but we'll pick that up later. But this is a good report, and I'm grateful that we're in the strong position that we are, and coming off last year, and it gives us we got a good foundation. So, Council, any other questions on the year-end and the quarterly report? Otherwise, we'll move on and we'll come back to this topic when we get to the COVID-19 update and talk about some of the financial risk. And I assume, Geraldine, you're staying with us so that you can participate in that conversation? Okay, thank you. Yeah. I'm not seeing any other questions on this, so we'll move on to the liquor store design. And I believe that Mr. Cannon is here, and now I'm seeing Brenda show up. And I think also Gary Tushy might be on the line in the meeting, or someone from his office. And so I will go to Mr. Cannon if you'd like to preview this and get it started.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. We do have Brenda joining us, as well as Gary Tushy and Dan Pellinen from Tushy Montgomery Architects. So we appreciate them joining us tonight. Just some background on this, how we got to this point. So in 2019, the city did a market study that indicated that the city of Lakeville was ready for a fourth liquor store. From that, council directed staff to go out for an RFP to see if we could find a public-private partnership to develop a liquor store, as well as the adjacent property to the north of the liquor store site, which the city owns, and do a joint development out there. We received two applications or two responses to the RFPs. Both of them were not favorable for the city. So City Council directed us to reject those proposals and move forward with developing a city-owned liquor store site on the southern property. From that, we contacted Tushy Montgomery Architects. They have a long history of working with public and private retailers, especially liquor stores. And they also had done previous work for us on this site when we were looking at purchasing it back in 2013. They did a sketch plan, site plan, and a building elevation at that time to make sure the site worked for us. So over the past couple of months, staff has been working with Tushy Montgomery Architects and preparing a couple of different options, which we'll take a look at tonight. The options include a two-story design, a single-story design, and a single-story design with an overall event, with an attached event space. And I'll let Brenda get into those details here in a little bit. Just as a reminder, we do own about 4.5 acres down along Keokuk Avenue. It's split into two parcels. There is a 1.38 acre parcel and a 3.19 acre parcel. The Keokuk liquor store would be located on the 3.19 acres. The way we approach this with Tushy Montgomery Architects is we ask them to keep within that 3.19 acres and not affect anything on the 1.38. We wanted to try to preserve that site for future development, or maybe for something the city wanted to sell off to a private developer. So we kept everything on the 3.19 acre site, which the site plan and the building elevations are all in your packets for review. One of the other things we also looked at was trying to get the a liquor store foresight set up in such a manner that it also provided a shovel-ready parcel, that 1.3 acres be shovel-ready as well. So with this proposals and with the budget estimates, it also includes, water and sewer utility hookups, stormwater retention areas, grading. All of that will be done to truly make that undeveloped parcel shovel ready for anybody to come along and start a development there fairly quickly. We felt that was important because as we're out there doing it, the efficiencies and doing the whole property, both properties at one time, and grading and infiltration and all that, it just made sense to increase the value of that 1.38 acres as much as possible and get it ready. The architecture of the building, we took a couple runs at that. The design has got more of a modern design. We wanted to keep a little bit of flexibility there, not knowing what legislation will do down the road or what our plans are for long term in liquor operations. So we wanted that design to be flexible enough to be sold off or spun off into either additional retail or office or restaurant or a combination of those. So all three proposals include a similar exterior with really high, low maintenance, high quality materials that will make it flexible for us to do what we want with that building in the future. From that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda and have her talk about the interior design of the store and then go through the options with you.
Yeah. Good evening, Council. Mayor. The three options that we had here, option number one was a single-story design, about 16,700 square feet. Now, when you recall, the study stated, or Shanahan stated, that this should be our flagship store, considering it will have the most visibility as well as will produce the largest in sales. So as a flagship store, the one-story design would provide 16,700 square feet. If you notice also in the design, you'll see that there is not a beer cave. And that was a kind of a question up in there, so I wanted to make sure and point that out, that none of the designs show a beer cave, primarily because of changes in the industry itself. People are going away from the beer caves primarily because women, who consist of 60% of all liquor shoppers, don't like to go in the cold. They feel vulnerable inside the coolers. It also creates a trade down situation when people are purchasing 12 packs or 18 packs. They don't realize where the cases are and they settle with what they can find. So with that said, and lastly in that discussion, and this was done with several people in the industry, primarily beer wholesalers, Kroger's, as well as most Hy-Vees are retrofitting their beer caves to go back to open face coolers. So with that said, option one is a single story design, and it provides about 16,700 square feet. The total construction, including fixtures, engineering, and construction, would total between $4.6 million and $4.7 million. The pros to this option is obviously it is the most cost-effective option. The cons with this sort of facility is the one area that we are really lacking is a training facility for not only our staff, but a location to conduct events. Currently, we conduct about 16 off-site events a year. It's proven that if you do these events on-site, you can increase your revenue up to 20%. So it would improve revenue, but it would also provide us a professional area to train not only staff, but to host these other events. Option number two is a two-story design. Now, again, we were told to create this as a flagship store, and there were comments received that an upper level with a cigar bar or potential bar up top would be grand. This two-story design creates an area that administration would be up top while store management is below. It does also have a training facility up there. It has 787 square feet of administration, as well as 4,788 square feet that would be able to host wine events and possibly be leased out or rented out for corporate events and such. The piece de la resistance on here is that it does also contain an 2,500 square foot outdoor rooftop patio. Now, obviously, the cost of this goes up dramatically, and the cost of this option, with everything included, including fixtures, engineering fees, and construction, would be about $6 million to $6.1 million. Pros to this, if the city wishes to designate that as an on and off sale, you could rent that facility out on top to corporate events, private events when not being used by the city. Also, if the city ever decides to vacate the municipal liquor operation, it would make a tremendous restaurant style facility. So the cons with this obviously is the cost. While this design would definitely be unique and definitely create a flagship, I'm not sure how we could make a full return on that sort of investment with the second level. In addition, obviously, elevator maintenance can be very expensive. The last one is a one-story design with a training and event space next door. The total cost on this would run from 5.3 to 5.5 million, including all fixtures, construction, and engineering. The unique part about this is that this I believe, utilizes the land to the maximum potential. It also creates an area that if the city decided to either get out of the business, you definitely have two entities to sell. But in addition, if it was ever deemed that the event space was not paying for itself, you could lease out that 4,000 square foot area to fast food or some other related retailer that would complement our operation. Again, our offsite events right now, we could save about $50,000 annually in expenses. And so it would take about 10 years to get a return on investment for that additional space. The cons to that would be cost savings from holding offsite events, would create the 10-year on return. Pros would be provides the best resale opportunity for the city, gives us the training room, gives us event space and everything we would ever want.
Brenda, there's a question from Councilmember Hellier.
Yes,
Thanks.
sir.
Just a quick question related to the 50,000 revenue. How much of that do you know is paid to city facilities, whether it's the art center or whatever? So it's like, you know, we might be saving money in the liquor department, but then is there 40,000 or 25,000 less in the arts center? Does that make sense?
Yes, exactly. Well, I could do a little bit of research with that. It would be extremely minimal because we do not pay fees for hosting the events. Rather, the Arts Center collects the ticket fees. So if we host an event where the tickets are $25 per ticket and we sell 100 tickets, they do collect $2,500 currently.
So
but we do not pay.
Okay, where are we paying rent to, I guess, then?
We are paying, well, most of that is labor, drive time, setup, as such, because on site we would have all of our staff there. And primarily the Holiday Inn is about $2,000 for every event that we host. So that's about $10,000 a year. The rest is primarily staff movement and setup.
Got it. Thanks.
So just as a follow-on to that, Brenda, the funds that are paid to Holiday Inn, that includes some food, correct?
It's $1,600 to rent the facility, and then it's an additional $600 for food. So I did
Okay.
not include the food in that.
Okay, thanks.
So with that said, I will turn it back over to Alan. Again, this would be no matter what. The inside, the interior has excellent traffic flow the way we have it set up. We have two tasting areas, facilities. It would be a premium store on the inside, no matter which one of these three options the city decides to go with. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Alan to speak a little bit about the financing.
Thanks, Brenda. Well, we kept the financing at a pretty high level right now because we can dig into those numbers a little bit closer. We get to a final design or the next step if we go that far. So really the basic on financing is a combination of the Kenrick property sale, the liquor fund, and then issuance of bonds to pay for whichever option the city wishes to move forward with. In the packet, I also included the tentative schedule. So if we were to move forward starting tonight or even delaying a couple of months, we could look at completing the design and the bid documents by December of this year, bidding it over the next couple of months from December to January, and then starting construction in February with a possible opening of the store in October of 2021. So the numbers that Montgomery worked with, and we included Greystone, which did the cost estimates that you saw in your packets tonight. Those are all very conservative numbers. They're kind of worst case scenario for council to make the decision on. And
Alan, you're breaking up a little bit. Alan, you're breaking up a little bit. It's at least for me.
Okay, you got me now? Can you hear me?
Yep, that's great.
All right, I turned off the video, so it's taking up some bandwidth here. So we just wanted, we got the numbers that were real conservative from Tucci Montgomery Architects and from Greystone to give council, kind of a worst case scenario on the three options and three costs. And it does include $75,000 in winter construction. So there's some flexibility in the numbers, I think. And if we were to kind of move to the next level, we would, tighten those up a little bit and get some better numbers and look at the schedule to see if we can avoid some of those winter costs as well. So from there, we're just looking for council direction on really which option you wish us to go with and kind of when you want us to move to the next step.
Okay, thank you very much. I do have just one additional piece of information that might be helpful. And can you just remind us how much was the funds that are from the Kenrick property sale, roughly?
General was still in there. I didn't know the exact number, but I think the sale of that was about 0.3 million. And I think we're right around still just under 2 million on that.
Okay, Geraldine's nodding yes, so that's helpful. Thank you. Council, any your comments, questions, please? Councilmember Volk.
Well, thanks. So out of the three options, I like the second one the best at first because my husband will tell me I have a champagne budget or champagne taste on a beer budget. But then I got the feeling that the staff or the recommendation was really the third scenario, and I can live with that. I was just enthused about the rooftop access, the look of the building. The second one was very classy. Not that the third one isn't classy, but so I'm very comfortable with going with the third one and starting as soon as we can possibly get going. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? We're getting a lot of
There's a lot
feedback.
of
If
feedback.
everybody else could mute, and then Councilmember Lee can talk.
I just wanted to say that Michelle took the words right out of my mouth. I agree with everything she said. But all are beautiful designs. I do get excited about the potential for those that event space in the facility.
Hellier.
I think the 3 is makes sense as a design, just in related cost. I don't know how I feel about moving forward right now on a project like this. I'm concerned about what the budget's going to look like for next year, and what choices that we're going to have to decide. And again, I hate to use this example. It's like I'm going to pick people over paying and financing bonds for a new liquor store. So I'm just, until we have a more clear picture on what revenue and expenditures are going to look like for next year, I think that this project should be put on pause.
I do think it's important, though, to recall what some of those revenue projections were going to be once the store opens, and how quickly that, if I remember right, this would be paying for itself and providing that additional revenue to the city. And so I understand the caution we're going to have this year about spending money, but I also do think that this is an investment in making money as soon as the fall of 2021, which is extremely important as well. So I get the caution, but I do think we are going to need to make some decisions here that are an investment in the future too.
Councilmember Wheeler.
I agree with the sentiment that Councilman Lee was just talking about. You have to be cautious at some points, but you also have to kind of strike when the iron's hot as well. So I have a feeling that construction costs in the next 6 months, I think, are going to be favorable to get things going in the next 6 to 12 months as well. Kind of going against what I normally say. As a city, we're looking long term to make money, like Lee said, but the amount of money that's going to take to build this, the amount of money that will return to the city, we should be, I feel like it should be just fine.
Okay, thank you for your comment. I'll just add my perspective on this. I think I think you folks from Tushy Architects did a great job with these designs. I think they're all attractive and energetic, I guess I'd use that word. And I'm sure that the internal design and everything is fully functional, and I don't know anything about that, but I'm sure it makes a lot of sense. I'm really not interested in adding event space. I appreciate that we utilize other spaces around the community to host our events. I like that. I think it's part of who we are as a community and our liquor operation to do that. And so I'm most attracted to the design that does not include the event space. I think for me, I would echo what Councilmember Hellier said. I think it's wise to pause with this. I'm really concerned financially that we're going to be putting ourselves in a really tough spot. And I recognize, I'm a business guy, I recognize the opportunity to make money, and we need to invest and take some risks to do that. But I think we also have a responsibility to our community to ensure that we are fully funding our public safety and other matters that are the guts of who we are as a city. So it's hard to say that, but I think we should pause as well. And I would just add that perspective into the mix.
Would we, Mayor?
Yes, Wheeler.
So with the funds we already have in the liquor from selling the other stuff, let's say we put this on hold and crap hits the fan. Are we able to use that money on anything and everything we want to, or does it stay in that?
Mr. Miller or Geraldine, could you respond to that, please?
No, there's no restrictions on it. It's at the council's discretion. With the exception of the bonds for the Galaxy store theoretically are pledged from proceeds from the liquor department, but I believe those probably have a general obligation backing. So for the most part, all the funds in the liquor department are at the council's discretion.
Gotcha. And with that said, are we all opposed to kind of doing the same thing we did and not owning and renting? I mean,
Well, if I can just interject, the proposals we received now, they might, if we went back into the marketplace, we might get a different result. I don't know, but the proposals we received, whenever it was, I'm looking at Brenda or Alan, 6 months ago or 9 months ago, were just not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not something we would choose to do.
I can
So they might come back.
interject a
They
little
might
bit
come
on
back
that.
differently, but I'm sorry, Brenda.
Yes, at the time when we did review those lease options, it just was not cost effective to perform at that level. I do have the data that I could provide, but at that time they were not reasonable.
Councilmember Volk.
So as far as the event space goes, a couple things about it. Number one, it's additional revenue immediately for the liquor store for people to just walk next door and actually make some extra purchases, etc., that evening. Two, while it's not being used for an event for us or training, it's additional revenue and event space for the community to rent. And so again, more revenue again, and event space in the community is, there's not a lot of it. So it would be another great space that would be available. So, I mean, there's plenty of options to be able to fill that space in, you know, if you kind of think of it in the simplistic form of when we're not running ice, we're running other events to be able to generate income for our arenas. Well, we would be, I would assume, come up with some kind of a plan to be able to generate even more revenue out of that space for the city, and to help us, and which helps the taxpayers. Thank you.
Brenda, did you have something you'd like to add?
Brenda, you're muted.
Brenda, you're muted.
Okay, is that better?
Yep.
Yes. In regards to our event space, if you've attended, and I know Mayor Anderson and Michelle, you have attended some of our events. Our events at the wine tastings are getting to be about 400 people, which we're probably going to have to divide that and actually start going into 2 sessions, which will increase our costs there. Michelle does have a very valid point that when you're on site, people go immediately to purchase. When they get home, they oftentimes either have buyer's remorse or just bring the sheet home and fail to submit their orders. The other thing is the Art Center, you know, this is an area we've been struggling with for about a year, is the Art Center has become far too small for our craft beer tastings. So we've been discussing those kind of options, and that's really what the event space is needed for. In addition, you know, you say, okay, well, there's event space. There's other ways to utilize it, like in the holiday months, you could have case options in there. So there's other ways to use that, but I respect the council's decision on whatever they decide with that option.
So thank you, Brenda. So I think we might have some varied opinions in terms of which direction we would choose to go if we move ahead. I think the main question here is there's a couple of people that have shared an opinion of pausing, and I think there's certainly some opinions about moving forward. And I think we have to kind of come to some sense about what makes the most sense right now. Michelle?
Well, I guess respectfully, two of you have decided that you know you're not comfortable with moving forward, and three of us were saying, unless somebody wants to say something, and I misunderstood, that we were comfortable starting to move forward. I guess to say, and then as far as the design, I think that pretty much we had most of the consensus towards number 3, the third design. So I guess I'm not trying to be disrespectful, Mayor. I'm just trying to tell you what I heard. And then I just would like to know also when you need a final answer on this.
Okay, so let's answer that question first. What is our timing and what are the milestones? Brenda?
Yes, I believe looking at the schedule, and Gary, you could interject on this one, but it really looks like we would not need to take any actions until September, when we would start preparing bid documentation. So there is some work we can do on the backside. We can still get plans submitted to the developer, because there are some processes we have to go through there to seek their approval. So I think we would have time to hold on to this for 3 or 4 months and do our due diligence on this end and see where this pandemic heads. While I'd like to move ahead, I can see the validity in the other points as well. It's really an unknown time, and I think we could do some work on the budget and get some further data for council to review exactly where the budget lands, and come back in July and then see how things are looking at that time.
Okay.
If that would be an option.
Okay, thank you, Brenda, for that help. Michelle, I don't find any disrespect in your trying to summarize what people have said. I just want to make sure that we go in eyes open here in terms of the direction we're giving to staff. And I will say I have extremely strong concerns, and we haven't talked about the potential financial risk that COVID-19 may be placing us in. I'm just going to preview that. That's about a $2 million number. And I will not sacrifice, as Councilmember Hellier has already said, I will not sacrifice staffing or other things when we know we've got dollars that we have in reserve right now that we can borrow from, and I intentionally say borrow, to cover some gap to get ourselves to the future by proceeding forward with this liquor store operation and putting ourselves in greater financial peril. I think I have strong feelings of concern if we would do that. And I recognize that we all have one vote, and I'm only one vote. I just want to express my serious concerns about our financial health with how bad this could get. So I would be comfortable. I do think your synopsis of the perspectives about this design your summary of that is appropriate in terms of what I heard as well. And I recognize that I'm a bit of an outlier on that, and that's fine. But I think if we want to pause this and have the conversation about the financial risk and ensure that everybody has full understanding. We can still come back to this evening if we want to make a directional decision for staff to advance things forward, if we don't want to pause. But I would like to get the information on the table as far as the financial risk before we proceed. Comments or thoughts about that? Who lead?
It sounds like Brenda also has a plan that will bring us more information in July. A decision actually needs to be made, but it sounds like moving forward with a store 3 design with more financials at that point would be where we're going next, if I'm hearing that right.
Okay, is that a comfortable timetable for you?
Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the scenarios that would work for us. If we got direction tonight on if option 3, the single story with the event space, is the direction that you wish us to move forward with, we can do that. We can continue down the road and go to back to Tushy Montgomery with more, and get more design on that, some better numbers. They can focus in on that option, and we can move forward with that and come back in the June work session or the July work session, see where we're at with the overall budget with the impacts of COVID-19, as well as where our numbers are landing on that option 3 design. And we can do that at very little risk, because it wouldn't matter if we move forward in December with bidding that project, or if we waited until the fall of 2021 to bid that project. As long as you're comfortable moving forward with that option 3 design, and you're comfortable moving forward building a store 4, we can do that and put the design on the shelf. If the decision is made in July, we're just going to wait. We're not going to move forward. We can put that design on the shelf and pull it back off at any time and go straight to bidding, and save us some time in the future, really, through that process. So we've got some flexibility here on moving forward with a particular option, doing the design, putting it on the shelf if that's what council decides in the future, and then pulling it off and bidding it at that time when things are better.
Okay, thank you. Council, what's your perspectives? I would be comfortable with that. Volk.
I'm comfortable with that. I think we should at least try to keep moving forward. And I am very respectful of both of your opinion and Luke's opinion. And so as we move forward with the design, we can talk more about money, numbers, when we get into when we have more meat. So thank you.
Okay. Other council members, you comfortable with that approach? I'm seeing one head nod, yes. Okay. I think we've got our direction. Staff, any further questions? Thank you. Thank you, Brenda.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Now, yes, please.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Just for clarification, the direction is to move forward with option 3 with the event space.
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll come back in June or July and talk more about and have more knowledge of where we are financially, and and determine if it's a go or not, and if it's not, what we're going to do. That's what I hear.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Okay. We'll continue on with our next liquor license renewal conversation. Next option. I don't know, Mr. Miller, if you're going to talk about this, or
I will take it, and I know our city clerk is on the line as well, and she'll jump in when I get some things wrong here. But our liquor licenses in the city of Lakeville run on a July 1 to June 30th calendar, And that was done several years ago just to space the work out for SHAR, and the renewals used to come around at the same time as elections. And so it was moved to July just to spread the workload out. We know that our establishments that have our liquor licenses, the on-sale liquor licenses, have obviously been impacted severely by the COVID-19 pandemic. And by best guess, mid-March is when they shut down. And it's looking like probably through the end of May is a reasonable of the guess as possible. So that equals to about 20% of the year. And so we are bringing forward a proposal to reduce the renewal fees for this upcoming renewal by a commensurate 20%. Renewals licenses start to go out at the first week of May or so. Those are sent out by SHAR to our existing license holders. And so we needed to kind of get a feel from the council on how you wanted to go about this before we put that out. What you have in front of you is a draft ordinance that does have those revised fees, and it's only for those that have been impacted, at least from the on-sale perspective. We'd not change any of the other fees from people that could continue to sell alcohol, maybe from a curbside service or something like that. So we have proposing reducing those fees by 20%, which is the red line in your memo there. The second thing that we are proposing is that we actually allow the fees for this 1 year only to be split into 2 installments. Typically, the city of Lakeville has charged those as one time at the time of renewal. And that is because we don't want to be put in the position of billing quarterly or semi-annually and not having that money come in. And then that puts the council in the position of having to revoke a liquor license for non-payment. Some cities do that, but we have chosen not to. But we think this year it's worth a sign of good faith to our establishments to help ease the pain a little bit and to put that into 2 payments. So the first payment as proposed would be prior to May 30th. That would allow us time to still process the applications and put them on a council agenda in June for approval. And then the second payment would be due 6 months later on November 30th. And then again, this was only a one-time or a temporary ordinance, if you wanted to call it that. So with that, I just wanted to put that out there. We have posted this online already so that if we did get direction tonight from the council, we could put it on the May 4th council meeting agenda. And because we had to post it for 10 days, we did that just in case. You gave us the green light to do that tonight. So if you do, we would put it on the May 4th council agenda, and then these fees would be incorporated into the license renewals for July 1.
Council, thoughts, questions? Hellier.
Sorry. Justin, what's the net impact on city revenue wise if we decide to go through with it?
Yeah, and I thought I had that looked up today. Shar, can you remind me, or do you know how many on-sale licenses we have?
Oh, gosh. I can't remember the exact number offhand.
Or
I could quickly look it up.
Actually, I think we did calculate this, Geraldine, right?
Yeah, estimating a 20% reduction would be about a $39,000 loss or a reduction.
So, and that is substantial. It's not, I mean, that's real money. But I do think that this is one of the very few things that we could do to businesses that have been directly impacted from our perspective. And so I think it's really important to do this and try to ease some of that burden on, especially if we can, if it's a help with payroll or whatever it is. So that's how I feel. If anybody, can you also, I know at one point they had talked about the state about easing some of the issues related to tax. Because I think, right, if you're late on your liquor taxes, on the state level you can't purchase, but I heard that they were trying to relax it. Do we know if that was included?
I don't. Shar, have you heard anything about that?
No, I've not heard anything about that either.
Okay.
Other questions, comments, council? Thoughts? Thumbs up on this? Wheeler?
Like, this is our spot. What if this goes till June, July? I mean, we're kind of basically doing exactly what we know is going to happen now. What if it's that? Are we just setting the standard of this is what we're going to give, or do we say 25% off instead of 20% just to kind of have a little buffer?
Mayor and council, that's certainly at your discretion. There is provision in state statute that you can refund portions of the license that have not been used. So if that were something moving into the next licensing period and this extended even past July 1, that would be an option for the city council to have.
Yeah, I think that this is a helpful gesture. I recognize Councilmember Wheeler, is it 20%? Is it 25%? What's going to be the right number in the end? We don't know that. I do know, with the take home beer and wine sales, I don't know how much help that is to anybody. But I think
we've sold about an 18-pack total.
Okay. So not much, but I think this is a good place to start from my perspective, and I think it's financial risk we need to absorb. And I wish we could do more for other small businesses and medium-sized businesses in our community, but we don't have the tools in our toolkit as some other cities do. And this is the one thing that we can do. So I appreciate staff's work on this, and also the coming to grips with doing 2 payments and what that might mean, and the administrative side of it. So I support moving forward with this. I saw a couple other thumbs up go up from Councilmember Lee and from Councilmember Volk. Is there any other questions? Otherwise, I think we've got agreement to move forward. I'm not hearing any questions. So thanks for giving the notice early and setting the stage so we can advance this forward. And we'll certainly want to identify appropriate way to communicate to folks, to our business owners, that this is coming down the pike. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
It'll be in the renewal letters that goes out after your meeting next week.
Okay, thank you. So speaking of COVID-19, we'll move to the update. Mr. Miller.
So a couple things. First of all, you might have seen that the governor last week did relax the stay-at-home provisions for office workers in some circumstances. Yet he did encourage anybody who can continue to work from home to do so. And so we're going to follow that path here at the city for at least the next week. We really are kind of taking things on a week-by-week approach, but things have been working well, at least from those who are working from home as well as it can. So we're going to continue to do that. I did express my interest with the directors today that if they have individuals who absolutely feel like they need to come in and can give a good business reason for that, to talk to me, and then we will come up with some options for that. And so there could be circumstances where people are coming in to do that, but for the most part, everybody's going to continue to be working from home like they have been. I also sent out earlier today a couple things. The mayor referenced it earlier. We, along with all the other MLC cities, have started to tried to put together some estimates on what this is going to mean from a 2020 budget impact. It really is, to a certain extent, very high-level guesswork. But what we've done is we just agreed for a placeholder to put a 3% property tax delinquency in. Just as a frame of reference, our average tax delinquency, both from the city and from the county wide, is a little less than 1%. And even during the recession, it got, I think, as high as 2, maybe a little bit higher than 2%. So 3% would be unprecedented from that standpoint, but we did feel like it was at least a number that we could put in. When you add up that as well as the other expenditures that we expect to incur, but the biggest issue is really revenue loss. And when you put that all together, we are estimating about a $2 million impact for the rest of the year. To date, we have incurred about $200,000 of what we would consider direct expenses for the COVID-19 pandemic. We've identified another $762,000 of indirect cost. Most of that is the cost of staff working at home. We were very aggressive at the beginning of this in setting up codes to isolate and identify all these expenses, so that in the hopes that there is some sort of reimbursement request, either from the state or from the feds, we'd be able to identify that. And we have broken it out into those two categories, because the more likely of the events is that there's going to be reimbursement for the direct expenses, such as hand sanitizer, gloves, PPE, plexiglass at the liquor stores, staff costs directly attributable to COVID. So we've identified, roughly $760,000 in indirect and about $200,000 in direct costs so far. And that's really for about a 6-week period, if you think about it. That's nothing close to the $2 million that we expect to incur the rest of the year. We have identified as staff about $775,000 worth of either deferred expenses or revenues that we think we can still capture. Now, that comes with a huge grain of salt. Those are very high level numbers that directors were given, that they gave to me and to Geraldine. We have not gone through them to really see how practical all of them are, and also how painful some of them are. I'll give you an example. Within the police department, we have 2 new hires this year that we have put off hiring right now. Part of that is due to state is not, the skills academy has not been able to go on. And so any new person who is getting into law enforcement just hasn't been able to get their certification. But part of it also is just a lack, we haven't filled any open positions. We had a GIS person that we had scheduled to hire this year, a streets person. So we have delayed any new hires that have been created through the budget. Any positions that were vacated, such as Neil Normandon's position, we reorganized that. We are going through the process on that right now, but that actually resulted in a little bit of a budget savings when we consolidated 2 people together. We've eliminated any paid intern positions, and then we've tried to identify any equipment or facilities projects that we could delay as well. And so grand total right now, those would, if we pulled off everything that we've talked about, that's about $775,000. But again, that's short of that $2 million. So we just wanted to give the council tonight a little bit of a scale on what we're looking at. Hopefully the $2 million is a conservative estimate, or that we're being too pessimistic. And, hopefully property taxes will come in more in the 1% to 2% delinquency rate as opposed to the 3%. But as we get further along in the year, it's harder and harder to make some of these decisions. And so we wanted to put that out there and see what your reactions were. I'll start.
Thank you.
Questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Michelle.
Sorry. So we haven't taken into account the earlier report that our budget numbers for 2019, the other million. I mean, we could use that, correct? Besides looking at just the liquor stores, 2 million. Now we have $1 million that came from 2019. If we apply that to the 775, that would get us to the 2 million probably.
That's correct. Yeah, we did not incorporate that into our discussions yet.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, please continue, Michelle.
And then my other thought processes is, I understand not hiring the staff at this point. I mean, that's pretty obvious too. But as far as the officers go, I mean, I realize that I guess I'm wondering, safety-wise, if, let's see, how do I want to say? It seems like it's quieter out there, and I don't see as many people being pulled over, et cetera, but I realize that people are on shift. But I also wonder if the crime maybe is down, so then it isn't putting as much stress on the system. And so I'm hoping, that that's the case, and it will be for a while as people gently come back into the world. And so maybe we get a little bit of reprieve by not hiring the police officers right now because of the duty load. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. If I can go back to your first comment, and as far as the funds coming in from last year, and that does give us some additional funding to cover some challenges. I also want to mention that from an advocacy standpoint, the CARES Act, there's some legislative things here that are being worked on that potentially could provide cities some relief, which is why I'm so grateful that staff went ahead and started coding things the way we have. There is some work still going on that there could be a revision to the CARES Act to possibly include cities. And there's all kinds of nuances to that in terms of the size of the city and all that kind of stuff. But, and then there's also some continuing advocacy going on with supplement number 4 here, or whatever the right terminology is, that might come down the pike from the federal government. And so there's a lot of moving parts right now, but I think we're prepared we've got the information we need to be able to step in if something does happen, that we could get some relief. And also, I just want you folks to know that we're advocating at the places we can through both individually as well as through the groups we're involved in, whether it's MLC, the Municipal Legislative Commission, or whoever, League of Minnesota Cities or whoever. So just a piece of information related to all that. And then I saw you, Councilmember Hellier, but if I could just ask one other question. And I know that there's a lot of moving parts here and with the numbers and everything, but how should a person understand the information in the email, Geraldine, about the 762,000, and how does that relate to the information in the spreadsheet as far as what we gave to the advocacy group?
Included in the spreadsheet over on the right side, there's 2 columns. They say other.
Yeah.
And one is 85,000. And that's talking about the direct expenses. That correlates with the number that was in the spreadsheet. There is a little bit of a timing difference. So when the league spreadsheet went out a week ago, it was at 85,000 for some direct and so forth. And then other indirect was 274. We subsequently updated it with the most recent email That direct is at 202.
Okay, and the same with the indirect, that relates to the last
Correct.
column. Okay, and so the point here is that as every day goes by, our information is updated and continues to be refined. So that spreadsheet right now is understated. If we just take those two columns, recognizing all the other ones are educated guesses. If we take those last two columns, they're substantially understated based on what we know today from what we submitted a week ago. I just wanted us to understand as council the nature of the moving parts here, and that as time goes on, these numbers are just going to get bigger and bigger. So, yes, Geraldine.
Just one other comment about the spreadsheet is that there's two columns that relate to the utility fund as well. There's a utility water and utility wastewater. I used the same assumption there of 3% delinquency.
Right.
Those aren't counted towards the general fund, but just to be aware that there could be a higher delinquency in our utility funds as well. That's part of the 2 million here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, council, other questions on Hellier?
Thanks. A couple things. The first, Geraldine, do you know off the top of your head? So let's just say worst case scenario, there's this 2 million. Plus, we have, I think we discussed earlier, 360 in new bond, right? Payments for the streets.
It would be 900,000, but if we reduce the first year by 360, it'd be closer to about 600,000 for new debt service levy.
Okay, so 9. Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is what is our increase in spending going to look like year over, from 20 to 21, if we assume 3%, increase in theory in spending and budget, plus these expenses, what are we looking at in totality? If you don't have that now in the next day or so, that's okay too.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to, in my mind, wrap around what we're staring down, worst case scenario of things we've already committed to versus, what we can hold off.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be putting something together.
Okay.
And then a rough number, Luke, is about every $320,000 in increase is about 1% on the tax levy. So if you look at the 640,000 on the one debt option, that's 2% just for new debt, up to 3% if you go up to the 900. That's just rough if you want to think of it like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, I was just going to say, I think it's also important to add into that mix what can happen to assessed value and also what our growth might be. I think last year our growth was about 3%. What we might, and I don't know, Mr. Miller, if you just want to remind us how that assessed valuation works and what if we have risk there or not.
Yeah, so the assessed values for 2021 are already in the books. And I was on a conference call on Friday with the county, and they're actually seeing a lower than normal tax appeal number. So we're not seeing a whole lot of risk on the valuation side for 2021. And the last time that Geraldine can correct me, I want to say the new growth that is in the 2021 valuation is between 3% and 4%, if I remember right, Geraldine.
I think so.
So theoretically, we could add 3 to 4% to the levy for next year, and people's city tax statement would be zero change.
Yeah, unless the assessments have mixed differently. The
that's right. I just in general. Yeah.
Right. So that's my concern is I think, and I know you guys are doing this, but from a policy perspective from our council, I think we need to start thinking about these tough decisions earlier instead of at, the typical October, November timeframe. And again, we have so little information, but I just, and that was part of my concern earlier about the liquor store is we need to have a really good picture of what we're staring down going into the budget season. So the other question I had was more policy related to COVID. I saw that the city of Ramsey relaxed their rules related to playgrounds with a caveat of some signage and recommendations about social distancing and washing your hands and all those things. What power do we have, of any, under the current stay-at-home order to make changes to that? Or are we prepared to set up some sort of policy if the stay-at-home order is relaxed further at the end of the week? I don't think it's going to be, but what if it is?
So I know John's on the line too, but playgrounds and parks, those were left at city discretion. Our playgrounds are technically closed. Now, they're closed with one barricade, usually at each one, with a sign that says the playground is closed. So that's not real highly secure. Tennis courts, pickleball courts, and that's have been taken down. I can tell you that when they were up, people were not practicing safe social distancing. And that's the concern. I know the cities that have done it have tried to say, it's limited to family members only, or in case of pickleball or tennis, singles only, and they try to spread out the courts. But I can just tell you from our examples, our experience, that would not be followed, and that would become an enforcement issue. But if the council wanted to, we could definitely do that. The other issue we will need to think about coming up is Antlers Beach, and it's going to be staff's perspective, at least with the best information we have today, it'll be staff's recommendation to not open Antlers Beach because there's just not a way to socially distance there.
So I don't know, maybe this is not the right time to have the discussion or the decision, and maybe it is. I am, my hope is, I guess for me, if we can have folks that are willing to abide by some of the recommendations for social distancing, like I don't see the difference between, people playing tennis in a distance manner than any different than golf, right? So I just
the problem was people were lining up outside the fences,
sure,
and waiting. And in the school district's case, they were climbing over the fences to play. And we share.
They were locked or what?
Yeah, we share so many facilities. There was a big concern to the school district that we be on the same page there. And so I'd want to have a discussion with them before we would reopen those.
Brian.
Do we know how many confirmed cases we have in Lakeville itself? And do
No.
we have any confirmed deaths?
No, we don't know. And no, I don't believe we have any deaths.
The best I saw is Joe Atkins had a stat for the county, and I can't remember what he put on his Facebook. It was something like 388 for Dakota County. That was the most micro-targeted. Yeah. But I mean, there's people that I know in town that definitely were not classified that have,
Right.
It's tough. The input I would provide on this is, and I shared with staff earlier today, and over the weekend, the messages and the emails I'm getting 2 or 3 a day, and they've really been focused on parks and specifically pickleball and opening the restrooms and the kind of, I don't know what the right word is, the kind of uniqueness of the situation where we've got closed restrooms, but we're putting a porta potty in, and what's cleaner. And so I think that, I mean, as I talked to staff a little bit earlier, and in my mind's eye, I think we need to start to think about how we can begin to relax a few things, but I'm not ready necessarily to do that today. I think we need to see how the governor's approach unfolds over the next few days, and in that context, look at how we can begin to have appropriate signage, like maybe what they did up in Ramsey, and and expect that people will take personal responsibility. I do think we've probably made some progress in terms of personal responsibility from 4 or 5 weeks ago when we saw so much crowd behavior at the pickleball cart. I think that there's a bit of seriousness that people have improved their ability to take some responsibility. I don't know if that means it's going to go away. I saw some behavior at parks today on my bike ride that was clearly not physically distanced and did not appear to be family behavior. And we're just not going to be able to control that. And I just hope that we, as a community, can continue to be serious enough that we don't put ourselves, if we start relaxing a little bit, we don't put ourselves back into a problematic public health situation. So that's my thoughts. Michelle.
So, Mayor, what I've observed is on these nicer days, our teenagers are the ones that are out and about even more, and those are the ones that are going to hit up the courts. They are not abiding by the social rules. They're invincible. And I've noticed in the last week, as the weather has warmed up here, more and more of them are out and about and hanging out. So it is what it is. The parents have, allow it, and as the rest of us, we just try to avoid those situations. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can't expect personal responsibility from all segments of our population, unfortunately. So while I love this community, but our young people haven't taken it as seriously as they should have. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Luke, did you have a comment?
Yeah, and I guess, and I appreciate that, Michelle. I just, and I think that's right. I've witnessed and seen the same. But what I think is, I see this as a choice between improving mental health in the city versus potential for somebody could get sick or maybe not. And so at this point, I am on the mental health side, and I'm just the way, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but the way Atkins, his numbers said that we've got more people recover than are sick in the county. For whatever reason, Dakota County is doing better than other areas. And I think that there's serious mental health things that could get worse if people feel like they have to stay in their homes more, or if there's an exhaustion. I'll just tell you personally, between having the kids in the house and trying to work at the same time, so I'm sure I'm not the only family that's like that. And so I just think for the sense to have any more ability for people to participate in the outdoors is helpful, and that's kind of where I come down on that.
Yeah, Brian.
Well, and you do know there's some crazy things going on out there on these reported deaths. My wife's in the industry, and she had a patient die the other day, and it was zero to do with COVID, and they were insisting to her, and good thing my wife was there. This is COVID, right? That she died. I mean, they were just pushing it on her. And my wife was like, if you put that in your notes, we're going to sue you, because she died of other complications, but they were trying to pin it on COVID. And I think there is a lot of that going on in our nations and in our world, that are trying to make this look more than what it is.
Yes, Michelle.
So, Mayor, the only other comment so I don't disagree with Luke, and I think that we should have discussion about this, but maybe, and I don't know when that discussion should take place, but I think we need to, have more time and maybe get some more facts, etc. But I don't disagree with you, Luke, that some of the families need to get into the parks, etc. And it's really up to a person like myself to make a determination whether or not I'm going to go into a store or what I'm going to do to protect myself. That's up to me to make those determinations. So what I'm trying to say, I should have said it in a shorter way. I don't disagree with you, Luke. So just because I brought up these other points doesn't mean that I don't disagree that we shouldn't be looking at ways to opening things up. So thank you.
And what I appreciate is maybe tonight is not the right answer, but it's certainly the work session in May is too far from that. And I just think that we need to, and maybe it's on the 4th, we have this as an agenda item for discussion. We'll have a better understanding of where the governor's at. I mean, I'll just say, I was very surprised that the governor last Friday was going to allow people to go back to offices who are not customer facing. I didn't think he would do that. So he may surprise me again on Friday and not extend a lot of this stuff. I mean, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa are, I think, a little bit further ahead than where Minnesota should be. They're going to reopen restaurants this weekend. But I just think that putting it off till a work session, not anybody suggested that. I just think we need to keep this on the forefront as much as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I hear your comment about being timely, and I think there's validity to that. I would just add, I mean, my two main, and you've seen this in my communications. I mean, I've been consistent. My two main concerns is our business community, and we're driving people to big box retailers, and our small business has just as much capacity to be able to look at ways to be safe and how they can serve people. And I'm very concerned. And I'm grateful what the governor did this last week, although it doesn't help a lot of our small retail. I'm also very concerned on the mental health side, and I just have such a close personal history with that. And I'm really appreciative of the work that our county commissioner has done, Mary Liz Holberg, and working with, and I've been involved in some conversations with the public health team, and having them come to our meeting last week to give an update, I thought was very, very helpful. And I think we just have to stay very cognizant of we don't want things to boil over. And I'm really, every day goes by, we've got, I believe, higher and higher concerns. We had a suicide this last week, and which is very sad. And my heart goes out to the family, and I just I can't say enough about this, that there's a lot of stuff percolating with the stress and tension that we've got built up with homeschooling our kids and people not working. And so those are two major concerns. And I think for us to consider on a timely basis how we can begin to give some pressure relief valves to this, even if it's just playing pickleball. I don't know what it is, but let's hope that people will take individual responsibility and continue and try to physical distance and be respectful of others, because there are some people that have real concerns about this, and they have immune deficiencies, and there's some other things going on, and we need to work together as a community. And I will just add, I am so grateful for the work of the city staff and our faith community to put in place this Lakeville Cares website, and both from a standpoint of offering opportunities for help as well as offering people the opportunity to help. And I'm just so proud of what we can do as a community to bring that forward. And I just want us to continue to advertise that and push that out any way possible, so that people know that that's another resource place to go, and to both get help and to help others. So thank you to the city staff. I know Deputy Chief Corman was real involved in that. I know others were as well. And I think the chamber, as well as Hosanna, was kind of the lead from a faith community standpoint. So that's an awesome piece of work, and it'll be helpful for us, I think, for the long haul. So thank you for that.
Can we add that as an agenda item for Monday? Kind of I guess the blanket agenda item would just be discussion based on the governor's new, whatever he decides and what we can kind of do.
We have a COVID-19 update. This is a standing item on any agenda moving forward, so it can just be discussed at that time.
But can we take action, or is it just more of staff direction on some of these things, or how does that work?
I don't know if it would take, or anything would require an action if we just got direction.
I think the answer to the question is we could take action if we want to give direction, but I don't know if we need to do that. And I think as the governor, as we see how the week unfolds, I think it will become, we certainly can communicate with Mr. Miller and staff if you have feelings about a particular opportunity that might exist within the context of what the governor does. I think we should try to keep the communication, the conversation going in appropriate ways as we head toward Monday night.
Yeah, I guess my perspective was as if three of us wanted to go in one direction related to relaxing some, and then two didn't. How would that play out? If you know what I'm saying. I just don't know how that.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think what I tried to say is we can, at a council meeting, we can always take a vote on a particular directional matter that we would want to put in place. Okay. If we would be put in that position.
Okay.
Other questions, comments regarding the regarding COVID-19? I will just say, if you have any suggestions or thoughts related to my mayoral updates to the community, I am anticipating that it kind of feels like an appropriate time to do another update might be after whatever the governor says this week. You already know that my two main themes are small business and mental health. I will just have to see what kind of unfolds, I guess. And if there's something that's appropriate to communicate, or if we wait till after Monday night, we'll see how that unfolds. But I'm open for input and suggestions, council. Shall we move on? So next on the agenda is items for future discussion. Any other items that anybody would like to bring up at this time? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand, or I'm not hearing anything, so we'll move on to committee and city administrator updates. Is there anyone that would like to start?
I can just give a quick update. We've been meeting virtually as the Dakota Broadband Board, and nothing major has changed other than, well, a couple things. At the last meeting, we decided not to adopt a prevailing wage policy, and that was based on, it was actually a really close vote, but we had decided, I think, at least from our discussion internally, that we wanted to, if whatever policy should line up with the city of Lakeville, which is basically what we decided. And that is if there's a county or federal project or state project, there's a prevailing wage standard. But if it's an agreement between, Lakeville and Apple Valley, and each city does not have a prevailing wage standard, then there just wouldn't be. There are two cities in the county that do have it, West St. Paul and Hastings, I believe, and they had wanted to do that. But, from my perspective, I don't think that the Hastings policy should dictate on any agreement between Lakeville and Burnsville. So that's kind of where we ended on that. And then we're readjusting some just internal executive committee and technology committee items, but that's kind of where we're at from that perspective. And I don't think we've had personnel since the last time we've met. We have certainly not had liquor committee, and that's that.
Okay, thank you for the update. Any other updates, council? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'll just give a quick update. I think this virus situation has improved the communication within the Regional Council of Mayors, as well as the project associated with Minnesota Mayors Together, which is kind of a subset of the work of the Regional Council of Mayors. There's been a lot of communication and activity, and I think in the end it's going to be very healthy for how the mayors of across the state come together and learn from each other and support each other. And a lot of the conversations in the Regional Council of Mayors has been around advocacy and looking out for cities and the stuff we've already talked about. So that's the only update I have. Luke.
Yeah, sorry. The one thing I wanted to mention as a discussion item for us is, have we talked about meeting back at City Hall again? Are we set up in the chambers to sit 6 feet apart? Is there interest in kind of getting some normalcy back to our meetings? Doesn't sound like it.
I have not been involved in a conversation yet about that. I'm open for other thoughts, and I don't know, Mr. Miller, what your thought is at this point in time, and how quickly we ought to advance that forward.
It's a council decision. I mean, we could set it up to where we could be apart. It would probably mean that the 5 of you would be up there, and then like myself and Andrea might be on where normally the staff sit, and then the staff would have to intersperse throughout the chambers, and we'd probably reduce the number of chairs that were there. It would mean opening up City Hall and letting people in, which we haven't been doing. And so there'd be that to think about. I know we've advertised at least the next public hearing for the Planning Commission as remote meetings, but I don't think we've advertised anything else out past that yet.
And what date is that, Justin?
I think May 7th.
Okay. Michelle?
I just wanted to mention that I'm open to talking about it, Luke, either next week or even again, so yes, I'm very open to figure out a way to get us back into City Hall. While these online meetings have been fine, they've been very difficult in the fact that, sometimes you get too many people, especially with our main meetings. You get too many people that are involved on the call. It makes it harder, at least for my bandwidth here at my little house, for me to be able to, the internet goes in and out, the video goes, up and down. So and it has nothing to do with chime. Zoom was the same way when we did together as a family. I mean, the bigger the group, that's just the way it gets. But even if the public were to only be able to watch online instead of actually attending, or could call in to, we'll talk about it later. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, Luke, I am open.
Yeah, couldn't the public Zoom in on our meeting? Can we still have a Zoom meeting, but we're not, but the public is?
Or you just set up 10 chairs.
Yeah.
We'd have to figure it out.
Okay. All right.
So I'm wondering if I'm open to have this conversation as well, and I can tell you that there are a number of city councils in outstate Minnesota that are continuing to meet with appropriate distance away from each other and reducing the number of chairs in the room. Clearly, it's a different situation, but I'm open to have the conversation too, and I'm wondering if we could ask staff to prepare for us as we have this conversation next week. This would be one of the items within the conversation, and maybe staff, Mr. Miller, you could work with people and come to us with a thought about how we might make some different kinds of options work. And I think we go through another week, we'll have more sense and information about what we might feel comfortable doing too. And so next week is our first meeting, so we wouldn't meet for another 2 weeks. So that gives us some time buffer there as well, to work things out on what it would be and be able to appropriately communicate to the public what we would be doing. So let's talk about it next week. Does that sound reasonable to people? Good point. I'm glad you brought it up, Luke. Other thoughts? Okay, Mr. Miller, did you have any updates?
I do not.
Okay. So I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second, and I believe I have to do this with roll call. So is Tamara still here for roll call?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anderson,
Aye.
Hellier,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Volk,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you so much for, this was a big agenda. Thank you for your time and your participation. Good meeting. Thank you,
Thank
staff,
you.
as well. Good night.
Good night.